Hey everybody, happy Tuesday and welcome to another Techstrong TV broadcast. I'm Charlene O'Hanlon. Today is Tuesday, January 18th. We've got a great lineup on today's show. I think it's a little short today, but that's okay because what we got, sometimes it's about the quality. It's not so much about the quantity. So today we're going to get things kicked off with a conversation between Alan and Dan Garfield from CodeFresh. He's the co-founder and chief open source officer. This is a conversation that the two of them had at last year's KubeCon and Cloud Native Con event happening in Los Angeles. And they discussed the mission of open sourcing CodeFresh, which, as I said, is the company that Dan is with. He also talks about GitOps and the CodeFresh Argo platform. So it's a great, great conversation. After that, Alan speaks with Rohit Seth, who is the CEO and founder of a company called Cloudnatics. And they talk about the origin of containers, interesting conversation, and why the world is still running blind when it comes to cloud spend. Definitely a relevant conversation for a lot of organizations that really still don't have purview into how much money they are spending on their cloud services each month. So definitely a conversation you want to check out. After that, we have a part 2 of our Haunted Hacker podcast conversation host Mike Jones has with Jane Franklin, who was the owner and CEO of New Start. She is an award-winning tech entrepreneur, a best-selling author, and a keynote speaker. She knows her stuff in the cybersecurity space. She's been named as a top 20 global influencer in cybersecurity, and she spent more than 24 years in the space. She founded and then sold her own hacking firm and has directed some of the world's most well-known cybersecurity consultancies. So Jane and Mike have lots to talk about in this podcast. And as I said, this is part 2 of our 2-part conversation. We ran a part 1 yesterday, so you definitely want to check out this. The first one is, and then this one as well. It is a great conversation. Jane is an inspiration for anybody in cybersecurity, especially for, obviously, cybersecurity, women in the cybersecurity space. So good stuff there. After that, speaking of women in cybersecurity, we have the latest, actually this is a rerun of a CISO Talk episode on diversity, equity, and inclusion in security. This one is hosted by Mitch Ashley and Matt Newfield, and they have the guests Wendy Reynolds-Dobbs from Unisys and Nicole Duff from Warner Media. They discuss the meaning and importance of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and how to create meaningful change in the workplace, especially as it persists to cybersecurity. I'm having a little trouble getting my words out here. Sorry about that. But definitely a topic that is totally worth checking out. We have this conversation about diversity, equity, and inclusion in pretty much every area of IT. Cybersecurity seems to be actually doing a little bit better in the space than other areas, but there's definitely change happening all the way around. And this is a great conversation, a lot of great interesting perspectives in this conversation. After that, we have the Something Old segment. This one features Max Gagliardi, who is a partner and co-founder of a company called Ancova. This is a presentation that he recently gave at the Innotech OKC, Innotech Oklahoma City conference that happened in early December. I was there. It was a great one. He talks about the basics of Bitcoin's proof of work system, the importance of Bitcoin's energy usage, and debunking the fear, uncertainty, and doubt around Bitcoin. It's definitely a very hazy area, even for me. I will be the first to admit I'm not a Bitcoin expert by any means, but it seems like a fascinating technology. So Max kind of parses out what Bitcoin is and what it means to the tech industry in his presentation. It's a good one. After that, I'm back with the news headlines, and then I have a conversation with Terry Simpson, who is a senior solutions engineer at Nintex, and he and I talk about digital workflows and how important they are, especially as we kind of ping-pong back and forth between in-office and hybrid and remote work because of all the different Omicron and Delta variants and COVID uncertainty, and the importance that digital workflows can actually bring to help keep an organization on fleek, if you were, just kind of keeping them in the right direction and productive, no matter where employees are working. This is a great conversation that Terry and I have. He's such a nice guy and really did a great job of helping me understand exactly how digital workflows are really impacting today's business environment. Good stuff there. After that, I've got the webinars preview for you. And then we close things out with a view with Vizard, in which Mike Vizard speaks with Nick Hudecker, who is the Senior Director of Market Strategy over at Cribble. And they discuss observability and why it is so important in DevOps these days. It is a great conversation. All right, that's it. I had a little trouble getting through today's intros. I apologize for that, but we're going to get things kicked off right after these commercial messages.
Hiring great DevOps and cyber talent is a huge challenge for technical teams. Cloud transformation is driving demand higher. You've tried doing it yourself. Job boards, LinkedIn, didn't work. Recruiters are an option, but who do you trust and not waste your time and money? RecruitOps is the new way to source engineering talent. From MediaOps, the people behind DevOps.com, Security Boulevard, Container Journal, and more. We sit right in the middle of the hottest positions in Dev, Sec, and Ops, and the brightest minds in the field. If you're looking for a great position or the talent to fill it, we can help you. Trust us, risk-free.
All right, we are back, and I've got more coffee. So let's go ahead and kick off today's Techstrong TV broadcast with a conversation between Alan and Dan Garfield, who's the co-founder and chief open source officer over at CodeFresh. This is from the recent KubeCon Cloud Native Con event happening in Los Angeles. And Dan and Alan talk about the mission of open sourcing CodeFresh, as well as GitOps and the CodeFresh Argo platform. Good stuff. Let's go ahead and roll it now.
This is Digital Anarchist.
In Los Angeles, we're at KubeCon. Yes, we're live. Yes, we don't have masks on, but everyone here at KubeCon has been vaccinated, and they've been temperature checked and had to answer a questionnaire and kind of watching. And here in our little bubble for our Techstrong TV, we're able to go without masks. At least the guests and our camera folks have masks on. But anyway, we're here. I'm here with my friend Dan Garfield, who, look, Dan and I, we used to do this all the time.
Yeah,
Dan.
we used to do it all the time when we had shows to do.
DevOps World. I mean, every show was always, we always had someone from CodeFresh and Dan, and then, of course, COVID came, and we've done a bunch. To be fair, we've done a lot of virtual interviews, but man, it's good to see you.
Good to see you too, man.
Absolutely. And then, you know, Dan, I remember when you took on your current role.
Yeah, so last year, I took on this role of Chief Open Source Officer, and the mission was essentially to take CodeFresh open source. And we announced this week on Monday that we're completing that mission. We're actually going open source. We're going to be launching a new platform called the CodeFresh Argo platform that's built entirely on open source and on Argo, which is a project that we're maintainers on along with Intuit and Red Hat, and it's kind of a big groundswell happening around that project. And what we've done is we've basically, in this new platform, we're kind of replacing all the core elements of our engine with Argo, and then we're also bringing some of those things into the open source as well. So that's a pretty big, colossal change.
Well, that's a sea change, as they call it, right? And amazing stuff. Congratulations.
Thank you. Yeah.
I mean, that's a really spearheaded thing. You know, I saw the Argo shirt. I had dinner last night, and at my table there was one of the Intuit folks, and we were talking Argo a little bit. Alex, I don't know if you know him.
Yes, Alex, Alex Collins or Alexander?
Alexander.
Alexander, yeah.
And we talked a little bit about it. So that is really big news and great stuff. And you know, it's interesting because prior to becoming Chief Open Source Officer, you were like sort of CMO or not, I don't know. I know they recently hired a CMO at CodeFresh, but you know, it was a marketing evangelist role. And this has gone beyond just pure evangelism, but really changing the company. So congratulations.
Yeah, thank you. No, it's been really cool, and we've been very heavily involved in Argo for the last year and a half, 2 years. I don't know exactly how long, but as a project, it's been growing incredibly well. It actually is the fastest growing, most popular open source GitOps tool that exists today. And it's growing incredibly fast. The user feedback has been very, very strong. So like the Net Promoter Score, which for those of people that don't track that, basically you survey people, ask how likely are you to recommend these tools to your friend? And a really common score for a company is like a 10. Comcast is like a -35.
Yeah.
A lot of more
Not
people
undeserved sometimes,
don't want to
but-
share it, but for Argo CD, Argo Workflows, Argo rollouts, the NPSs are over 70. They're like 75.
Wow.
It's pretty unreal. It's very uncommon, and basically it means that users love it. And so what we've decided to do is, with CodeFresh Argo platform, is really focus on the scale use cases. If you have 5,000 hospitals where you're running Kubernetes clusters, one of our customers is doing this, and to have a control plane to do all your deployments and get all your visibility across edge, on-prem, in the cloud, that's really important when you're doing that level of scale and you have so many deployments happening, to have clarity into what's going on, do it all in a GitOps way. That's what's driving a lot of this growth. It's really cool.
Absolutely, and that's amazing. I want to dive in on Argo, if you don't mind.
Yeah,
Dan.
please.
So first of all, you guys are maintainers, but it is a CNCF project?
Yes, that's right. It's a CNCF project. It's currently going through the graduation process.
Oh, really? So it's already approaching graduation?
Yes.
And that is kind of the final phase, if you will, right? Of the CNCF sort of life cycle evolution there, right? That's impressive. How long has it been around?
So Argo as a project was started a couple years ago.
It's pretty fast to get to graduation.
Yes, it's very fast to graduation, but the growth rate has been very high. I mean, if we look at some other legacy open source tools, it's growing typically 2 to 3x faster than any of those tools. And
that's great.
The adoption's been very strong. We had GitOpsCon yesterday. We've got ArgoCon coming up in December. People can register for that for free.
Very cool. Is that just virtual or in person?
That's going to be virtual only, unfortunately, or fortunately for some people. But from a use case standpoint, yesterday Chick-fil-A was talking about they're using Argo CD to deploy all of their stores. Starbucks is using Argo CD to deploy to all of their stores. We had a number of just amazing companies. Salesforce is going to be speaking at ArgoCon. And they've been doing heavy load testing on Argo CD and Argo rollouts. So the scale stuff is there and the companies are doing it. So it's excellent.
Excellent. So let's talk about Argo a little bit. So it is GitOps. It's funny, we were talking offline, I was at dinner last night, and a former Gartner analyst was at our table. And he was like, so what exactly is GitOps? Now I shut up, because those are the kinds of questions where I look around and I want to see what everyone else says before I wade in. And there was another fellow there who's with a company associated who said, well, I'm not really a big fan of the term, but this is kind of what it means. And he tried to explain it. I'll be honest, I didn't think he did a great job explaining it.
I feel like you're setting me up for something.
Well, no, I'm going to put you on the spot here. How do you define GitOps, and then how does Argo, what's Argo's role in that, right?
Yeah, so this is actually a really common thing. Kostas Kapolonis, one of my colleagues, gave a great talk on GitOps 2 weeks ago, and he asked the audience at the beginning, how many of you are using GitOps? And 65% of the audience said we're using GitOps today. Then he gave a talk on GitOps, and he asked, how many of you are using GitOps today? And now only 5% of the audience raised their hand. So there definitely is a gap. An understanding gap. And so GitOps is actually a formal standard. The GitOps working group, which is a CNCF project that I'm a maintainer on that, we actually launched Open GitOps 1.0, the standard, at this conference on Monday. So there is actually a set number of principles. There's 4 principles that go into it. And it's more than people typically realize. A lot of people think GitOps just means, well, I make a commit and things happen. GitOps, sounds great. And that's definitely part of it. You do need to have a declarative format for your desired state of not just your infrastructure, but also the application set on top of it. Basically everything you need to run the application needs to be done in a declarative format. It needs to be stored in immutable version storage, which Git can be an implementation of that. Now, GitOps, actually, you can be doing it without Git, technically.
Theoretically, if you're using some other version control type of thing.
We actually debated you could probably achieve it using something like Google Sheets, as long as it's versioned. But not that I would recommend that. You can do things that aren't necessarily a good idea. But
well, it's just because you can do it doesn't mean
you should. Yes, and having it be version controlled is important. But a lot of people use Git in a way that subverts, pun intended, version control, because they'll use something like a latest tag on an image. Well, that means it's no longer versioned. So there is a little bit of implementation there. Then you have to have continuous reconciliation using software agents. So you have to have essentially an element that is not just accepting webhooks from a commit, but is actually monitoring the current actual state and comparing it constantly against the desired state, and then triggering reconciliation off of that. So if somebody connects to production and makes a change, without going through the process, GitOps should actually pick up on that and actually should suppress that change and basically reapply the desired state. And this essentially, when you bring all these things together, a lot of these things are things that companies are doing to some degree or have done to some degree for many years. But when you put them all together, it creates something a lot more powerful than just the sum of its parts.
I agreed. All right, let's talk
I don't know
Argo
if that was a great explanation.
No,
It's very
you know what?
long-winded.
Look, for our audience, it was perfect, actually.
Okay.
Let's talk Argo now.
Yes.
What does it do in this GitOps?
Oh yeah, so Argo is actually a pretty broad project. There are 4 main tools in the Argo tool set. There's Argo Workflows, Argo Events, Argo CD, and Argo Rollouts. Now, Argo CD and Argo Rollouts are the 2 things that are really related to GitOps. Argo Workflows is a workflow engine. You could use it for CI, people use it for data pipelines. There are companies that are doing 20 terabyte machine learning models pushing through Argo Workflows, big GPU stuff. So that's a separate potential use case. But Argo CD is a GitOps agent. So you can deploy this onto your cluster. It comes with a great UI, and you can basically, it'll monitor the current actual state against your desired state and trigger reconciliation. So very straightforward, right? That's the software agent. Argo Rollouts is a tool for doing progressive delivery using GitOps. So if you want to do a canary release, if you want to do a blue-green deployment, those kinds of things, people have been doing those for years, but they have to create procedural, intense processes to do it, with something like a Spinnaker or something like that, which definitely works and is very mature, but it's also fairly complex. Argo Rollouts, you can basically declare a standard for approaching a canary release or a blue-green deployment in declarative format, and fairly simple and easy to use. Works with service meshes, works with Amazon ALB, works with just an Nginx, ingress controller. So it's very versatile and straightforward to use.
Love it. Argo, where do people go get it and find out more?
Yeah, Argo, you can just go to Argo Project, argoproject.github.io. So you can just Google Argo Project, you'll find it. ArgoCon coming up in December 8th. You can just go to Argo, just Google ArgoCon, and it'll be the first result that you see. And
hopefully.
Hopefully.
If someone hasn't bought the ad, but whatever.
And we have links to all those things at codefresh.io. So there's a link to the conference for ArgoCon. There's also GitOps certification on Argo CD, offered for free at codefresh.io.
Very cool.
And then, of course, CodeFresh Argo platforms we just announced. All that stuff's on codefresh.io.
Excellent. Dan, you've been busy. You've been a busy
There's
boy, man.
There's been a lot going on.
Good for you, man. I'm happy for you, and
Thank
congratulations with Argo.
Thanks, Alan.
And everything happening. Dan Garfield, Chief Open Source Officer, key person in the GitOps movement and Argo here on Techstrong TV. We're going to take a break. We'll be right back.
SecurityBoulevard.com is the leading resource for news, analysis, and education on challenges facing the cybersecurity industry. SecurityBoulevard.com covers all aspects of cybersecurity, including data security, DevSecOps, cloud security, application security, network security, security threats, and more. SecurityBoulevard.com has the largest selection of security content, featuring breaking news, blog posts, podcasts, and more. Visit www.securityboulevard.com to learn more. SecurityBoulevard.com, home of Security Bloggers Network.
All right, we're back. Next up, Alan speaks with Rohit Seth, who is the founder and CEO of Cloudnatics. This is also from the recent Cloud Native KubeCon Cloud Native Con event in Los Angeles. And Rohit and Alan talk about the origin of containers and why the world is still blind when it comes to their cloud spend. It is an interesting conversation. Let's go ahead and roll it now.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Hey everyone, we're back here at KubeCon in Los Angeles live. That's right, live in Los Angeles at KubeCon. Really happy to be here. If you haven't caught any of our interviews from this morning, they will be available on demand probably in a couple hours or maybe by tomorrow. But we will be here live all day today and tomorrow. And if you're wondering why my guest and I are not wearing masks, the great thing about KubeCon this year is you need a vaccine to get in here.
Absolutely.
And you do get tested. They give you a temperature check and some other things. And you can't see it, but the show floor is behind us, and it is a vast, huge show floor that's very socially distanced. I feel safe here.
Absolutely. Alan, I just want to start with, it's so refreshing just to be out there among people.
Just to be with people. I see you from here down.
Yes.
It's not the Zoom shot.
It's not the Zoom shot anymore.
Yep. Let me introduce you to my guest. His name is Rohit Seth. He is with I'm going to mispronounce it,
Cloudnatics, yes.
Cloudnatics. Rohit, excuse me for
That's
messing that up.
That's perfectly all right.
So talk to us. I don't know if our audience is familiar with Cloudnatics, but before we get to it, let's talk a little bit about you, your position, your history, and how you come to Cloudnatics.
Sure. So, folks, first of all, as I said, super excited to be here in KubeCon. Just to be sitting among this audience is very, very refreshing. Out of my four walls at home, finally.
Yeah.
So, I have about 30 years of experience. 10 of those years were at Intel, where I enabled the Linux ecosystem for x86 servers. As hard as it may sound at this point, they were 1990s and early 2000s when Intel actually did not have a much bigger footprint into the enterprise database part of the world. The Suns and the IBMs ruled. But that's where my organizations in Intel worked along with Linux community, as well as rest of the ecosystem like Red Hats of the world, to enable the core x86 technologies to help Linux scale.
Mm-hmm. And what for those of you who weren't around, and let's face it, here we are 20 years later, 20 plus years. A lot of people watching this weren't around then.
No, they were not.
And they don't realize what a battle that was, right? Because you had Solaris, and you had the Unixes, and you had Windows.
Absolutely.
And, and there were other open source. There was FreeBSD, and many other OSs that were vying for a piece of a Unix file. Unix came in so many different flavors.
Right.
And it was like balkanized, if you will.
Absolutely. I think that was the world of databases where even a small single percentage on a benchmark called TPCC mattered. Yeah. And x86 was about 10% slower. So there was absolutely no way.
Yeah.
And this is where I think my realization came, how much it is important to actually showcase the world, the real meat behind the architecture. And some of the technologies that we kind of take for guaranteed in today's world, like huge pages and scalable schedulers, were actually done by either me or by my organization back in those days.
That's fantastic.
Yeah, and that gave me the view of efficiency, the performance on one side. But as I joined Google in 2006, and I was there in Google for about 11 years, the first thing that hit me was the scale of it, right? Yes, I used to run performance teams in Intel before. Yes, they were about 100 node clusters, but what I was seeing in Google, just to start with, were the thousands of machines coming together. It was so beautiful.
You know, when we look, so what separates the giants from the wannabes? Hyperscale.
Right.
Right? It's all today, you know, when people say, oh, I want Amazon-like performance, I want Google-like performance, what they're really saying is, I want that hyperscale.
Exactly. And the first thing that struck me in Google was how good is their utilization at that scale. So I spent next couple of months working with my other sister organizations just to find out that utilization number. And even the tech-savvy company like Google at that time was using, on an average, a lower teens of utilization. So that's what led me to co-invent containers.
Really?
So the first Linux patch that was actually just put out, even on a theoretical basis, that contains separate applications on the same platform was written actually by me.
Really? I had no idea. Right?
Yes.
That's fantastic.
And
when was this around?
2006.
2006, about 15 years ago.
Yes. And of course, the end game was for Google to adopt those technologies so that we can have different applications be co-hosted without paying what I call the VM tax. VMs were about 25 to 30% slower.
Yes.
And in the Google world where 0.01% matters,
Makes a difference.
25% is a no-brainer, right?
Yep.
So that's where the next 6 years my organizations took the journey of enabling the whole Google ecosystem with containers, where shared pools were starting to coming in. And I actually saw the utilization quadruple in those 6 years.
Wow.
Right?
Wow.
It was a new way of working.
It was back then.
Yes.
I mean, it was. I remember speaking to Solomon, the one from the guy who started Docker.
Right, Solomon.
And it was such a. Now, of course, containers were around before Docker.
Yes, that's where the C groups came in, and that's how Google ran containers.
Exactly. And the thing about it, though, from a developer perspective, too, right? So there was the developer perspective, the ops perspective. Having containers that allowed you to abstract below the VM, not have to work off hypervisor, but to go on to bare metal, so to speak.
Right, exactly.
Was, as you said, a fact that you eliminated 25% of your overhead, like that. Then I think the beauty, when we look at the container maturation, what the folks at Docker did, opening it up to developers to make it easier for them to utilize this bare metal, platform like that. I think when we write the history of cloud native, when we write what about, the internet, commercial internet started 95, 96, let's say. The cloud, 2005.
Right.
2005 to 2020, I think it is containers.
It is container. There's no other way to look at it. And give credit to Docker because they actually provided that framework to distribute the application in a one single cohesive fashion so that you can run on any platform without worrying about the dimensions of it.
Yep. And from a developer and ops point of view, it's great. But you needed that underlying container to be, was there. So it just fantastic. So now let's fast forward, though.
So fast forward 10 years. And what I started seeing from the industrial reports, journals like yours, and talking to executives in particularly the companies that are starting to grow with data, right? Remember, there were only 2 companies 10 years back that had petabytes of data. There are probably 2,000 of those right now. And this number is not going to slow down.
I know.
By 2025, they are expecting 175 zettabytes of data to lie around in the world. I don't even know how many zeros are there in it.
Yeah, I was going to say, that's a number we can't get our heads around, really.
More data means more processing for business insight. More processing means you're going to use more computational resources. And if you're already wasting and using those inefficiently, that expenditure is going to not linearly, but exponentially grow because more data brings in more complexity.
Yeah.
Right? So that was the hypothesis where I started Cloudnetics in 2019 January, that if inefficiency is a true problem that executives are facing, then this problem is going to exacerbate with data.
Exponentially.
Exponentially. And we need to handle this problem as soon as possible. And purely based on that hypothesis, we started talking to executives, we started talking to different companies just to kind of proofread, does these ideas gel? The thing that surprised me the most in those conversations was how often the executives were running blind about their cost.
Yeah, I agree. Because I don't think for most executives, it's a bits to bytes to business discussion. The CIO may say, my God, our utilization is, our storage capacity is, or, you know what, how can we shave 20% or even 5%? But for the CFO, what does that mean to him?
I'll give you this story, true story, okay? 2019, I have a CFO executive friend, and I was just chatting with him over the coffee, and I asked, listen, you have this tens of millions of dollars that goes on. Can you give me a breakup of which business unit spends how much is their utilization, and if there is any room for improvement? He said from a CFO point of view that those are very interesting KPIs that we should be tracking, and I'm sure we have that data.
But
so let me go ahead and ask my team members to get me that data. 1 week passed, 2 weeks passed, 4 weeks passed, and I kept on kind of, hey, do you have any insights into... After 6 weeks, he said, yes, I have the high-level view of, this is much is my total spend, but beyond that, it's based on cloud service provider accounts, and there's no aggregation. I can spend my efforts, but I don't know what to look for. So that was the key insight. Point number 1. The world is still running blind when it comes to cloud.
I agree.
When you were operating in on-prem, it was most of the time CapEx spending.
Right.
You have spent it, now it's a matter of utilization.
Sure.
You are in cloud, you really don't know how much you are going to spend till the time you see the bill. Even if you have service plans and the best of the practices employed, you still don't know how much you're going to spend. And if in this environment you're going to grow with your spend exponentially without knowing how efficiently you are doing, you are going to break your bank account much
before you reach your goals. I was just going to say that. Because it's the exponential factor to it, right? Where if you start off inefficient, that inefficiency, it's like if we were planning a trip to the stars, right? And it's 10 light years from here. Even though we may have a very small off on navigation, over the course of that 10 light years, we're going to be in a different galaxy by then, right? It's the same thing here.
Absolutely.
If you're this much off now, that is crazy at scale.
Absolutely.
And then that's it. So how do you help with that?
So our first step, this is what I call the first tile of our product, is basically you click to log in to have the complete global view of your organizational spend across any cloud provider.
So it gives you what that CFO couldn't have.
Yes, right? And that's good to have as a step number 1, okay, what is my spend? But what we are really looking for is to be able to educate our audience, the developers, the DevOps, the executives, on a single screen, depending on the scope that they have, how much of it is a waste, right?
Exactly.
Because, I'm spending $5 million, but is it good or is it bad? So we give you that information on the very first screen that out of 5 million, 2.5 million is the waste.
So would you call that optimization, or like how are you arriving at that?
We are basically getting at that number, looking at your utilization in your
Okay.
CPU and your memory
Right.
and
I
resource
got it.
dimensions, right?
Okay.
So if you have reserved a VM that costs you $5,000 a year, how much of it is your percent utilization? And we collect that data over 3-4 days just to make some meaningful decisions around we don't want to make it a completely incidental information, right?
Understood.
Now, once you have, this is my spend on different cloud providers on a single screen, this is how much of it is a waste. We want to also kind of go a level deeper. We want to mimic your real world business organizational structure and say your marketing is spending this much, your engineering is spending this much, your product is spending this much. And by the way, you can slice and dice that data, just like Gmail filters, across tens of dimensions. You can look at it through CSP, you can look at it through region, you can look at it through a product, you can look at it through production, what's the staging, what have you put your label, and you can slice and dice that data almost on the fly. So those are the top level deliverables in terms of providing the visibility about what is going on in your environment. But we understand, and coming from Google, I understand that the complexity drives the destiny. Right? Unless we address that complexity, yes, you will now have the information about your spend. Yes, you will have the information about your waste. But then the next question is, what do I do about it?
Actionable.
Right? So what we also do is we give you the recommendations on how do you reduce your waste.
Got it.
All right? And this is where, Alan, I've heard so many times our customers telling me that, oh, but we have spent these 4 resources or 8 resources over the last 2 years just to make sure we are spending in a meaningful fashion. 2 numbers. The maximum utilization that I've seen with any of our customers so far, 23. Okay. Number 2, even after having 5, 7, 10 resources working on this FinOps utilization, first of all, it's an organizational nightmare to push their agenda through, but let aside that part because that's a separate discussion in itself. The maximum they have been able to fetch is 10%.
Really?
Right? So what we are saying is, even in those environments which are so-called already optimized, we can give you about 25 to 30% improvement from day 5.
And that's on an optimized one.
Yes. Right?
Crazy.
Right. So
Crazy.
So we give you those recommendations to begin with. And I don't want to lose the sight of the complexity because that's driving that waste and that efficiency in a global environment for any enterprise. So what we really do is we go level deeper where your developers and DevOps, I keep on calling them SREs just because of my Google background.
It's okay.
But the DevOps.
They're part of the DevOps team.
Yes. The interesting part is I've seen how efficiently the hyperscalers run their SRE organizations. I used to manage the backend infrastructure of display ads in Google.
Okay.
Right? One of the largest.
It's a little scalable.
Biggest, I won't go into the numbers, but biggest application in Google ecosystem. And I know the number of SREs that used to manage my backend infrastructure. When I compare them with what I hear from enterprises, by the way, and these enterprises have no way to support the number of DevOps that they...
No, that's what makes the hyperscalers.
It's automation, it's the sophistication, right?
The largest enterprises, I'm not saying what they have is trivial. It's not trivial.
No, it's not.
But they are not hyperscalers.
Right.
Yep.
So what we really do is we basically provide a platform through which it makes the lives of those developers and DevOps easier.
Got it.
And the last stage we do is we put all these recommendations and such on the autopilot mode.
If people chose that.
If people chose, they can just simply say that, okay, I have now enough confidence in your system to make the right decisions about scaling and bin packing and what have you. Let's go autopilot because that's how Googles of the world do their operations.
That's how they do it. But you got to build the confidence level.
Yes.
Rohit, we're out of time. You know what we didn't mention? People want to get more information. Where do they go?
So please reach out to www.cloudnetics.com. Reach out to contacts@cloudnetics.com.
Spell it for them.
CLOUDNATIX.com.
You heard it. Cloudnetics. CLOUDNATIX.com. I just want to make sure we got that in there.
Absolutely. Thank you.
All right,
so much.
Rohit Seth, Cloudnetics here with us. We're going to be live and just with our next guest in just a moment. But we're signing off for now. This is Alan Schimmel here at KubeCon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
ContainerJournal.com is the leading online destination for centralized computing-related content. ContainerJournal.com covers all aspects of software containers, from container management, data management for containers, container security, networking for containers, to the entire container ecosystem, Kubernetes, microservices, serverless, and more. ContainerJournal.com has the largest selection of container-related news, featuring breaking news, blog posts, podcasts, and more. Visit www.containerjournal.com to learn more.
All right, welcome back. Next up, we've got the Haunted Hacker podcast. This is part 2 of a 2-part conversation that host Mike Jones has with Jane Franklin, who is the owner and CEO of New Start. She's a cybersecurity rock star. She's an award-winning tech entrepreneur, best-selling author, and keynote speaker. She has founded and sold her own hacking firm. She spent more than 24 years in the cybersecurity space and has been named a top 20 global influencer in cybersecurity. She has lots of great things to impart, and Mike and Jane have an amazing and fascinating conversation. So let's go ahead and roll it now.
Yeah, I know, beggars belief. I mean, I've been there, as a pen testing company owner and seen and some of the security vendors out there finding vulnerabilities in their products and them just turning a blind eye to it and just like, okay, well, that's fine, but, come on. You're a security company. It's just like, wow. Or finding out that they haven't done SDLC. It's just like, oh my gosh, that's just like beggars belief. But yeah, it's still ongoing and still we're having those conversations. Or we're coming up with different names for the same thing.
Exactly.
It's like, oh, new word, new phrase, but actually it's the same thing that we were discussing.
Yeah, we just put lipstick on it and put it out there.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I made a transition over to the UK a couple of years ago. And one thing that I observed is that the UK in general is super excited about cybersecurity. And it's like a fresh excitement, right? So here in the States, it's kind of monotonous and the markets are flooded with pen testing groups, cybersecurity groups. But I had this sense of genuine like excitement over there. And I don't know if you sense the same thing, but I think that out of all the countries in the world, when it comes to cybersecurity, I think England is probably one of the most genuinely excited and pushing the envelope as far as countries in cybersecurity.
Interesting. I mean, as Brits, we are innovators, so we're good on our research and we're good at creating things. We're highly creative, whether that's science and technology, security, cybersecurity, art or design. We are really strong in that element. Tiny little nation, but we're really strong in that. But what I would question Israel. I mean, the work that's coming out of Israel is amazing. I haven't been over there yet. And also the Middle East as well. It's just like those two regions, it's just kind of like, I think there's some really interesting work that we're going to see coming out of the Middle East. I've just got back from Saudi, and certainly I know your listeners might be listening to it out of sync, but it's going to be really interesting to see what comes out of those regions. We know the goodness that's coming out of Israel. So I would add those regions to it. But yeah, of course, as Brits, we're good on that side, the creativity side, the innovation.
Yeah, I totally agree. And the artificial intelligence that is coming out of England as well is pretty exciting. I spent some time at Cambridge and speaking to people at Darktrace. One of my good friends works there, Max Hennemeyer. And we're constantly talking AI and looking at some of the stuff that comes out. And there's one application that came out that really caught my eye, and that was the AlphaGo documentary about the AI that played Go against one of the world champions. And it was amazing.
Wow. Yeah, it's exciting. I mean, it's when technology advances in leaps and bounds. And I think during COVID, this whole 18, 24 months, 2-year period, we've seen so much creativity. We've needed it. We've needed to come up with solutions and things like that. But I think there's been an injection of creativity. It's just well, what can we do? How much better can we be? How can we solve these problems? So that's some of the goodness that's come from this period, this pandemic. That's really exciting, because I do believe that to be a huge leap. Because we've seen that, cloud, just the way that we're working, all of that was supposed to be coming in the next 2, 3, 4, 5 years and further. But we've just had that fast forwarded, thanks to the pandemic, and because of the way that we've been working, some people being laid off and things like that, they've needed to create and or have a break. And sometimes having that break enables the creativity to come back. I mean, how many people during that period when we were in lockdown and so on picked up their paintbrush or a musical instrument and kind of went, oh my gosh, I remember I used to draw, or I used to paint, or I used to play this instrument, or do you know what? I've always wanted to learn how to do that. I'm going to do it. And it's just like there's been a revival of creativity. And so having that space, having that injection just creates more.
Absolutely. And I think that the landscape, the target landscape for technology, for attackers has exploded because of the pandemic.
Absolutely. And it's horrifying. And that's one thing. That's why there's more talk about resilience. And, certainly for years I've been talking about this, writing about it, speaking about it. But also as a business owner myself, it just makes common sense. It's just like, okay, right, fine. It's not a case of if and when. It's a case of, well, when you discover, because that might already have happened, or how fast can you bounce back? What are your commitments to your shareholders, your clients and customers, your stakeholders? How can you be diligent and do enough within the constraints of your budget to make sure that you are reducing your risk as much as possible? And I think it's interesting. And I just think it's interesting. And I really do think that more of us in the industry need to have a good old dose of entrepreneurship to really bring home this message, because often practitioners can get really frustrated with those that they're working with when they don't implement full security solutions, and sometimes they just don't get that, well, it's in line with budget or what we're doing as a business. So I think a good injection of entrepreneurship would really help them to understand that better, and as part of the understanding, to be able to communicate that and gain the buy-in that is necessary in order to influence some of the decisions that are being made.
Absolutely. I think that a lot of that goes back to the beginnings of cybersecurity and the thought of return on investment. A lot of companies back then didn't believe that cybersecurity had any ROI. And I think that thinking still kind of lingers around.
Well, this is it, from a trust perspective. It's just like, again, like communicating the advantages. Well, what is that return on security investment gonna be? What's the deliverable? And it is really important to consider that. And I think it also, what's also interesting is whether or not we're going to move into more of a liability. So you've got good practice, security, good practice, best practice, which many of us advocate, or whether it is just going to be compliance. And I think we're going to move into much more of a compliance arena going forward, which will mean tick box exercise, tick it off, because the liability the business owners are going to face. And that's going to be really frustrating for those of us in the industry who believe in best practice, as well as like ticking off for compliance and the regulators, which you need to do. But I think that's where it's going to get really interesting, because I think we're going to become much more compliance driven than best practice.
Yeah, we actually have the U.S. government is starting to get involved with mandates as far as cybersecurity goes. I hate to see that being pushed on people, but I mean, if it makes us all better, it makes us all better. But there will always be those companies or those people in different industries that would much rather pay the fine because they have that money than to actually meet that compliance.
This is it. And in some cases, from a business perspective, it's cheaper.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like awful, but that's how they've done the maths. And it's just like, actually, we're not going to spend that because actually it's cheaper to run the risk and pay the fine.
Yeah.
So, and you can understand it. I don't agree with it, but you can understand it. But that's where that duty of care comes in, the ethics come in, and the reputation comes in. And this is where us as consumers need to have more clout. What is happening with our data? At the moment, we don't have any power over our data. There's been a compromise, whether it's a big company or a small company, and it's just like, well, what can we do? Just got to suck it up, and we've got to change our passwords or whatever. But the industry infuriates me so much, on so many different levels. Passwords, for instance. I mean, it's just like crazy. Why can't there be a standard? You're going to this site and it's just like, it drives me insane. It drives me insane. And from the compliance aspect, we need to be more united. From the regulation, the legal aspect, we need to be more regulated, because, I mean, it's good business for many people out there, practitioners and sectors. But the more united we can be, the easier a job it's going to be, because at the moment it's a minefield. It is an absolute minefield. And again, thinking about it from a company perspective, it's just like, wow, here is your sea, here is your ocean.
Mm-hmm.
And if you want to play globally, you have all of these considerations to make, or otherwise you literally look at it and kind of go, I'm going to run the risk. I'm going to take make a decision based on risk and the information that I have, and move forward in that respect without actually implementing some good practices that you need to.
Yeah, I think that we actually deployed the internet in kind of a haphazard way. It's a global being, it's a global object, but yet different countries have different laws. Like the UK has GDPR, right? We don't have that. We have our...
Yeah, exactly. You don't, but you've got the Californian law, which I think is pretty. I'm not a privacy expert, and I'm certainly not a lawyer, but I think that's there are similarities there. But it's just like, come on, you have all the states. If you just take the US, it's just like all of the states in the US, and then you've got all of the other countries in the world, and it's just like when you are operating globally, all of those considerations, from simple privacy, a statement on your website, it's just like all of those considerations that you have to make. And there are tools out there that can help you, and there are great practices and consultancies and so on that can help too. But it is a minefield. It's not easy, and we could do a much better job.
Oh, absolutely. When you look at it from a unique perspective, right? If you look at it from an attacker's perspective, and you look at how disparate the different countries are with their regulations, their compliance, and even going as far as the way different countries prosecute hackers, you can see how disparate the whole world is when it comes to the internet.
Or ransomware insurance. It's just like some companies, it's like, it's a crime to pay the ransom. And that, right now, the best practice advice is don't pay the ransom.
Right.
But I know, and we know that a lot of companies out there, those in charge, are making a call when it happens to them. It's just like, okay, right, fine, yeah, I'm going to pay the ransom, or no, I'm not. I've got backups and everything in place, ready to go, and da. But it's not as simple as that. So yeah, completely agree.
It's crazy, and I've done something like 12 incident response engagements in the past 60 days. And one thing that discourages me and makes me kind of lose a little bit of hope about the direction we're going is when cyber insurance gets involved, their first question always is, who's the attacker and how much do they want? Not, let's take a look at the network and see if we can dig you out before we consider paying a ransom. Immediately, they want to know how much. And I think it's the wrong approach. And I think the more that we pay the attackers, the more it's going to happen because there's benefit there. And and I've seen attackers companies that have paid the attackers, and then the attackers come back and do it again. So this is it. And also, if you do pay, there's no assurance that you are going to get everything restored. I can't remember what the percentages are, but I looked into it fairly recently when I was chairing a conference, and it's just like there is no guarantee at all. So it's like it's a game of risk. The game of risk. Why would you? It is, and it's painful to watch these companies go through that. The latest one I did, actually the most impactful one that I've done in the past couple months, was a small medical company, and they were providing X-rays and images to different facilities, and everything got locked, everything got encrypted, and I saw the real impact of it. It wasn't just technology. This is touching people's lives and people's well-being.
Well, this is I mean, we had our first death, didn't we, in Germany? Mm-hmm. So that was not too long ago. So we have a serious case. So yes, it is not just a case of loss of revenue or loss of assets and an IP or bad reputation. It can be life-threatening.
Absolutely.
So it's becoming far more serious, and the more connected we become, the more online we become, the more technology advances, the more dependent. I mean, to me, I just see us boiling the frog. We are literally boiling the frog right now, and it is horrifying to watch. You know, all of the bad design that is out there, all of the solutions that don't work. They don't work with one another. They either don't work full stop, or they don't work with one another, and they're supposed to. It is infuriating. I mean, literally almost everything you touch, and you think about the numbers of tools that we are using on a daily basis. I mean, 2 or 3 years ago, it might be 3 years ago now, 2 or 3 years ago, I did a panel for Dropbox, and we were talking about the numbers of tools that we're using. I think on average then it was something like 40 tools per day. Mm-hmm. You know, so it's just like, that's only going to increase. And it's just, when these don't work, and when they don't work with one another, and we're reliant on them, it's just infuriating. We're dependent, and we're controllable, and it's just not a good position. We're losing so much.
We're literally at the mercy of the tool production. And I thought when the idea of SIM first came out, I thought, here we go. We're going to unify things, and it's all going to work together. But when you know it, that was not the solution to answer the problems. And I really, truly think when people always ask me, what do you think it's going to take to move that bar? What do you think it's going to take as far as what we can do better? And it's not more tools. It's not more advanced platforms. It's basics. I'm going to deploy a VPN because there's lockdown. Let's look at what VPN solutions are out there, and let's look at the vulnerabilities before we buy them. And I think people at home do the same thing. They go out and buy, like let's say a Siri device or an Alexa device, but they don't look at what's going on in our industry as far as that device goes, and they leave themselves completely vulnerable.
Yeah. It's like impact, isn't it? It's like, what's the impact of making a decision based on that? Have you thought it through? But we can make that. We need to improve ourselves and the way that we are operating for others to kind of get at. So we need to become much more influential. We need to lead more. We need to be able to communicate better so that we can help others to become more aware of the decisions that they're making and the impact that can have. So I think there's a bit of a revolution that needs to occur collectively in terms of people, humans, consumers, individuals, but certainly in terms of us in our industry, then we need to look inwards, and we need to upskill majorly, and it is the foundations, because like most industries, if we do the basics really, really well, and certainly in security, if we do the basics really well, then we are going to get rid of the majority of the vulnerabilities, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. But what's really surprising is I did a podcast with Dana, and Dana has this huge podcast, and she does CMMC stuff. And we talked about geotagging on photographs and how vulnerable, that leaves kids and stuff like that. And would you know that there were security professionals who didn't know that actually existed? And I'm like, wait a minute, this is so old. This is way old. But I think that there's a lot of that goes around. I dabble a lot in RF. I say dabble. I spend most of my time on RF. And the reason being is we've created these defense platforms where we focus on IP, applications, stuff like that. And unless your company is built inside of a Faraday cage, you're vulnerable to RF. And people are shocked. They're like, wait a minute, you can do this? And I have to explain to them, we've been doing this for the last 20 years. Just nobody pays attention. So, I think as an industry, we do have a lot that we need to communicate to each other and build each other up and raise that bar together. There's too many disparate groups that are focusing on different technology, but not sharing it collectively.
Yeah. And it's a bit of a paradox, isn't it? It's just and again, it's part of our industry. It's just secure, lockdown, it's mine. Nobody else's, no one else can see it. And it's just actually, we need to open up more. The more which is going against everything. It's just the more we open up, the more secure we can be. But it's that leap of faith almost. It's seeing. I think of Indiana Jones. It's probably crazy, but I think of Indiana Jones. In one of his, I think it's the third one, the one where he's with Sean Connery. And I say Indiana, and I get the piss taken out of me for saying Indiana and not Indiana. But as I've just recently discovered, but he's doing this, and he's going to find the Holy Grail.
Holy Grail.
Yeah, and he's throwing dust over the bridge. He's taking that leap. He's putting his foot out into the void. And then he goes onto the bridge, and then he throws the dust, and he sees the bridge, and off he goes. Races along. And I think it's a bit like that for us. Yeah. We need to do more of that.
Yeah, I think as an industry, there's a lot of room for growth, and definitely some new invention. So, what do you have coming up in the near future? Any talks? Any big projects?
Yeah, I've got. Yes, so I have got a major project. So I've got some good talks as well, some major talks. So I'll be talking at Harvard Asia next year in India. Nice. So that's going to be in August. And I don't know if that's going to be live, obviously, because of the situation. And there's some other ones. So Every Woman, I'm going to be doing a talk in London with them in March, and some other ones that are just being put in place now. But my main focus next year is going to be on my women's platform, the Source, and that is really it does three things. So it's for women, all levels. So whether you are entry level or leader level, including entrepreneurs, come and join. So it's going to be like a playbook, but you'll have three things that are in it. You've got masterclasses, so therefore personal and professional development. So I'm drawing experts from my network who will come and teach a masterclass, and then experts from the industry who will come and teach a class. And then there will be the mentor matching and the accountability buddying up matching. And then there's a whole load of resources to really help women to become stronger, more resilient, more empowered, more informed, more energized, so that they don't get burnt out and worn out. I need to help companies, and that's why I work with companies. So to help them to instigate good practices that will not only attract women and retain women, but actually be beneficial for all people. But certainly the platform will have a whole load of resources, so events and collaborating with other groups so that I can share their work. It will have podcasts on there, stories, jobs that employers have, so there'll be a natural flow, and there will be communities wrapped around it. So if you are an entrepreneur, there's an entrepreneur community. If you are a student and you're studying for a particular exam, then you will have that community. So it's that's my major focus for next year, to get that up and running and really delivering value for the members and also the companies who use it. And I'm so excited. I'm so excited about that. And it's so time for me, because I wanted to launch that in 2019. I built the platform in 2019. The experts weren't ready, so it didn't launch. And then in 2020, my plan was to launch it then, and we had COVID, and it was literally all hands to the deck to survive. And then thrive that. But it was like, oh my God, what is going on when everything stopped? All the money stopped, all the projects, like, hang on a minute. It's just like, oh my God, what's going to happen? So 2020 was really kind of figuring that out. And 2021 was like back on track. This needs to happen this year. It really does. So it's something I've been working on in the background for probably about five years. But yeah, so next year it's like head down, focus, and charge. And I'm excited about the impact that's going to make for us as a security community.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's so inspiring to hear about that type of project going on. So we're at the end of our hour, and it's been an absolute brilliant conversation. I really enjoyed having you on. Thank you for coming on. And if anybody wants to ask you a question or get a hold of you, what's the best way that they can do that?
Definitely come and connect with me on LinkedIn or Twitter. And I keep it really simple. So it's Jane Frankland. So just look for me there. And if I don't come back to you, please persist. It's not that I'm ignoring you. So just keep on asking, and I will answer. It's just that I might not do it immediately. It just depends how much I've got on. But yeah, that's the best way to find me.
Awesome. Well, and I think you have something like 22,000 followers on one platform, just an insane amount of followers.
Yeah. And also the other thing that I've got coming out, I've got books coming out. So I'm excited about this. So my second book is called Insights. It's going to be a series of books. I'm going to be coming to the community asking for help with this series. So I'm really excited. Yeah, I'm so excited about this. And then I'm going to kick that off, get that book out. I've got a planner coming out as well, which will help the community. And also I'm just about to start writing my third book, which will challenge me definitely as a writer, and it will be highly valuable for the community. So yeah, there's quite a lot of writing work that's going on as well. Yeah.
Awesome. Does the word overachiever come into play at any point? I mean, because you have so many inspirational things going on and you're everywhere. Just an awesome inspiration. But thanks again. And do you have any questions for me before we close it out?
Not at all. It's been so lovely talking to you. So thanks so much for having me.
Absolutely. All right, guys, that'll be it for today. And if you see Jane on social platforms, make sure you say hello. She's very inspirational and a great person. And we'll see you next time. Thanks, Jane.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.
CISO Talk, to hear how real-world CISOs are dealing with today's real-world issues. From enabling secure remote workers to accelerating secure cloud adoption, defending against a pandemic of security attacks and beyond. CISO Talk covers the cyber topics you want to learn about. With your hosts, Unisys CISO Matt Newfield and Media Ops CEO Alan Schimmel, featuring a revolving panel of CISO cyber experts. This is where CISOs talk. Join us on digitalanarchist.com and techstrong.tv.
All right, welcome back. Next up, we have a new episode of the CISO Talk series. This one features Mitch Ashley and Matt Newfield as the hosts, and they speak with Wendy Reynolds-Dobbs from Unisys and Nicole Duff from Warner Media on the topic of diversity, equity, and inclusion in security. This is a very relevant topic and one that's near and dear to my heart. We are very, very keenly aware of the inequities that still very much occur all over IT when it comes to gender equity and parity and just underrepresented communities. And so this is a great conversation about what organizations can do, really what it means and how important diversity, equity, and inclusion is, and how organizations can create meaningful change in the workplace. It's a great conversation, definitely one worth checking out. Let's get to it now.
Hi, and welcome to CISO Talk. My name is Mitch Ashley. I am CTO with Techstrong Group, as well as principal at Techstrong Research. I'm joined today by my co-host, Matt Newfield. It's the end of year. I've never said that the whole year. But anyway, welcome, Matt. Good to be doing this with you.
Great to be here again, Mitch, and I don't mind being a co-host too. It's
co-host. It's a new word. It's going to be popular next year. Trust me. Okay, so our topic today is diversity, equity, and inclusion. Fantastic topic. I'm super excited. We've got some amazing guests, just people I love anyway. But the topic is super fitting for what we're doing today. So I'd like to have everybody introduce yourself. Nicole Duff, if you want to tell us a little bit of who you are, where you work, what you do, that kind of thing.
Yeah, sure, Mitch. So hello, everyone. I'm Nicole Duff. I'm a business information security officer at Warner Media. So I do all the things about cybersecurity. I'm also a visiting lecturer at Clark Atlanta University and host of the Urban Girl Corporate World podcast. Great to be here again with you fantastic people.
Best voice for a podcast, I tell you. Every time I hear you say that, I can hear your podcast. And of course, we have with us Wendy Reynolds-Dobbs. Wendy, welcome. Tell us about yourself.
Yes, thank you so much. So Wendy Reynolds-Dobbs, I lead diversity, equity, and inclusion at Unisys Corporation. Very excited to be here and join this conversation today.
Fantastic. And I should have said our topic is diversity, equity, and inclusion in the context of security in the industry. Matt and I talk frequently about one of our roles of people that have been doing this for a while is mentoring, helping move the industry along in different areas. And diversity, equity, inclusion is a big problem. Let's be frank about it. It's a lot of work to do, a lot of progress that we can make. We can sort of get caught up in it's systemic, and yes, that's part of it. But we can't let this stop us from what we can do as individuals, as people working together, those kind of things. So we want to really explore this topic today. I'm excited to learn a lot as well as participate. I know Matt is too. Matt, you want to just share a few thoughts to kind of kick off our conversation, and then we'll get rolling here.
Yeah, look, I'm very excited as well. I think this is going to be a great learning experience and help either solidify thoughts that some of us have that are in the audience and here doing this podcast in our leadership styles and areas that we should be changing and looking at. We were doing a pre-brief around this, and, I find it very interesting because words matter. And, having the conversation here and being an active listener, even if you're not engaged, actively listen to what is being said. I think it's going to be very important because each of us are individuals and we have to make sure we understand other people's points of views matter. And then what we can be doing. One of the interesting things that I've seen in DEI conversations is there's a tendency to talk about either way far in the past or way far in the future. What are we going to do today to fix something after most of us have retired? What happened when we were children? And one of the things that we're going to try to talk about today is what are things that we should be doing today, right now, This doesn't have to be a next millennia or a pre-millennia conversation. Let's talk about today because it matters to people today. So I agree with you, Mitch. I'm excited to be able to talk to Nicole and Wendy. They're amazing people in this industry. They're just amazing people in general and are going to bring a wealth of knowledge to this conversation.
Just to start the conversation, I'm very curious because both Wendy and Nicole have a lot of experience in the topic of DEI. And I'm curious, how do you bring up this conversation? How do you have this conversation with friends, with peers? I'm speaking as a white guy. I'm afraid of bringing it up the wrong way, but I will, even if I, do it in an awkward way. But how do you start that conversation? Wendy, do you want to kick that off?
Sure. The one thing about DEI that I find just really interesting, it's very personal, right? And what I always share with people is that everyone is part of the discussion of DEI. Like a lot of times I hear people like, oh, we have to hire a diverse candidate. I'm like, well, what does that mean? Because there's a group of people that are diverse, right? So what are you saying? Do we need to hire women? Do you need to focus on this or that? We're all part of this word diversity. White men, white women, Black women, LGBTQ, we're all part of it. And so when you talk about how do you bring it up, you just do. It's part of your daily conversation. And everything that we do, we're making decisions. We're interacting with people most of the time, especially in the workplace, that are different from us. So it naturally comes up in conversation. Even when we were talking, in our discussion prior, it just comes up. And I think for people, you do have to get comfortable being uncomfortable. You have to be okay and feel comfortable challenging each other as well. But I do want to stress the fact that DEI is not for one population. It includes everyone. We're all part of that fabric of DEI. But Nicole, I would love to get your perspective on it as well.
I totally agree, Wendy. It's interesting. We talk about DE&I, whether we know it or not, in every facet of the business, right? So when we begin to talk to it about people, it shouldn't necessarily be that difficult. I do appreciate what you called out, Mitch, right? Like, I don't want to bring it up in the wrong way. Mm-hmm. But I think, just like any other thing, we've got to find our safe spaces. And sometimes you can just ask like, hey, I want to talk about this. How should I approach this topic? Are you comfortable about approaching this topic? And let's just have the conversation.
Mm-hmm.
So when one of the things, and I love if you see me looking down, unlike a lot of our CISO Talk episodes, I'm taking a lot of notes. So when you say ask, and this goes back to Mitch's question, when I'm in a lot of situations, we are taught by legal, we're taught by HR to be very careful around these topics. They've been made sensitive. And we can make a billion excuses of why it's made sensitive. I've heard craziness that it's the media's fault, or it's our parents' fault, or it's HR's fault, or, it's Mitch's fault. I mean, I blame Mitch for a lot of things. I would love to explore a little more on, in companies, and let's not say corporations, but in the world of business, is there really a wrong way to bring this up without going to crazy? I mean, yes, there are stupid ways to bring it up, but it's a conversation I think is important at a leadership level. I think is important at an all hands level within your group. Mm-hmm. I think it's important when you're talking out in public. So how should this be discussed so that it doesn't come across as fake? It doesn't forced. It doesn't come across in the wrong way. What are your thoughts about how do we do that? How do you get this moving?
Well, let me first talk a little bit about the sensitivity piece, right? It's interesting because I think the world is just changing. I mean, everything changes, but I think the world is changing where conversations that used to be very taboo, like, oh, don't mention this, don't mention that, are coming into light, right? And organizations are trying to quickly react to that, right? But the one thing about it, it gives us an opportunity to talk about DEI more candidly, more transparently, where I believe probably even 10, 20 years ago, we stayed away from a lot of topics. I might not have talked about my experiences of being a Black woman. And now it's like, the door has opened to really talk about that. So I think, like I said, I think the world is changing where people are starting to be more transparent around conversations like this. And so, yes, still, there might be some touchy subjects here and there, but I think the door is open where you can ask questions, kind of like Nicole shared, and be able to have conversations in the workplace that are around topics that we used to not talk about. But anyways, going back to your question is like, I think your question, Matt, was like, how do you bring things up in an appropriate way? I think DEI shows up in so many ways when we think about the workplace. When we think about, having conversations with our, when we have talent discussions, I'm in HR, you have talent discussions and you're talking about, evaluating talent. DEI comes up in that conversation. It's like how, if you're in a performance conversation and someone says, well, I don't like their style. You're like, well, tell me more about that. What does that mean? Questioning that. Why are you sharing this? So I think it comes up in our daily discussions that we have with our teams. I think it comes up in some of our processes where you can easily bring DEI into the conversation. I think as leaders, when you're having town halls or you're talking to your team, you can bring DEI into that discussion. What are we doing in our organization around DEI? What are some of the things that I believe in around DEI? So I think there's always natural ways in the workplace to bring it up. And then even, personally, when talking to your teams, asking questions like, just in your daily kind of conversations with your teams, it's going to come up. I think where for leaders, I think a lot of times they're apprehensive sometimes to not rub people the wrong way. But I think if people understand your intent and know that you're not perfect and you're not always going to say or do the right thing, that's okay too, and to acknowledge that. But Nicole, what's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so this was interesting. And I appreciate, Matt, that we wanted to dig a level deeper on this. I remember when I moved to Romania for a while. So now I'm on the opposite end of the coin, right? And now I'm the outsider and I'm trying to engage this very, very new cultural dynamic and environment. And I'm not necessarily certain how to process things because I am not back at home. Mm-hmm. And so one of the things that I did was I found my person, right? That I could ask questions in that, so they may not come out right. I may be offended by some things. I may not have that understanding. They can provide that for me. So there are a couple key points on that. The first is self-awareness, mm-hmm. right? And then how that trickles down into understanding that I may have my own unconscious biases. And then self-education. So before I engage with somebody from that community, I come in knowing a little something. And I think that's how we begin to have conversations around DE&I. Even if there's something that I want to ask someone from a different group, why am I curious about that? Exploring my own curiosity, right? And maybe pressure testing that somewhere else. But I really think self-education, self-awareness, and realizing our own biases go a long way and help facilitate having those exchanges.
You bring up a great point too, Nicole, because I always stress that as well, self-awareness, mm-hmm. number one. And I think for me personally, and maybe, yes, I'm a DEI leader, so people feel very comfortable asking me all kinds of questions around DEI. And I'm like, of course, but you got to be willing to open up just a little bit. So when we think about, and we talk about this with DEI and DEI education, and DEI education is great to start that self-awareness journey, right? It's not the end all be all, but it definitely starts opening your eyes and kind of going down the path of exploring and learning. And the one thing that I always share with people is that it is a very personal journey, right? When we think about DEI, you might be challenging how you grew up, your experiences, what you were taught, and it could turn your whole life around, right? So it's very personal. It's not like teaching someone how to use Excel and go back on your computer and do it. It is very personal. And a lot of times you go through this process and you're like, oh my gosh, what I was taught was wrong. Or, what I felt before was wrong. You talked about being a professor. I used to teach as well. And I remember I was in a class and I had a student from another country and she was like, I was so nervous about being around African-American people for what I grew up knowing, in imagery. And she's like, and then I came here and meeting, folks that were different from me, I felt very comfortable. I started to change my thought process. And so with DEI, I think the one thing, self-awareness is important, but being able to open up just a little bit with people, because that gives them the invitation to open up to you. And so when you're able to do that and really start to build relationships in that way, you can have more authentic conversations. People will give you a little bit more forgiveness when you say something that's a little bit off-putting. And but I think that's a big thing, is you got to be willing to share just a little bit about yourself to allow people to do the same.
Especially if you come at it from I'm not telling you something, I'm asking you something. Hey, I'm thinking this. Am I off basis? Am I wrong? And accepting that criticism. Mitch, go ahead.
No, I was just going to offer one of my many family members. One of my family members falls into a diverse category, and in talking with her about it, one of the things that I didn't know I was saying something wise or important, but I said to her, I said, I know that I will never have the same experiences. It's impossible for me to, whether it's not just history background, or just not in that place where I could. So knowing that I really truly can't experience it, the approach that I take is I'm having this conversation to learn. So you talked about education. There's learning about DEI as a topic, but I think the conversation is the learning part of it too. And if you're approaching this as, well, let me tell you what I think about the topic, that's a whole different approach than let's talk about it, because I have some things that I know maybe a lot that I don't know. And there's terms that I maybe haven't used before, or they're being used in a different way. Because I know in people that are coming through school and college now, women's studies and diversity and all, those are topics that are being taught, skills that are being taught, and they're using words in same words in different ways. And so I have to say, well, what do you mean by that? Because that meant this when I was growing up, or as I understand it. So but you also have to self-challenge and just don't assume I know what I'm talking about. I think I know some things, but I'm willing to understand it's different than I think.
Well, you both said something that I want to explore a little more. It kind of blew my mind a little bit in a good way. We always talk about mentors, and I'm a big fan of getting mentors. And when we talk about mentors, in a lot of ways in business, it's about your career. It's growing your career. You get a technical mentor, get someone in the cyber field if you're in the cyber field. Maybe you get somebody that's not in your field to help you learn diversity, as in finance, if you're a cyber person. But you both have touched on finding someone that you can build a relationship as like a mentor. And I want to make sure I'm hearing this right, to help educate, maybe the wrong word, it may be the right word, but help me on my journey to understand DEI better and make sure that, I've encompassed that in my organization, my life, my career, because to Mitch's point, I can't experience what you experience and you can't experience what I experience. And that requires a conversation. And you both said it in a safe way where a little about me. So if I say something that in my head is not derogatory in any way, but you're like, okay, look, when you say you don't care, and there's a joke behind that to the audience, I know you don't mean that the way you're taking it. And I could go, whoa, yeah, I'm never going to say that again. So I would love to get your thoughts on the mentoring aspect of that.
Go Nicole. Looks like you want to say something.
Yeah, there are a couple layers I want to touch on there, and I don't want to get us off track with that. But I think we all have something that we can learn from somebody else, right? Whether it's what to do, and sometimes it is very much what not to do. And I think there's a lot of learning even as you begin to explore who these trusted advisors are, right? Because even their advice is a downstream product of their own experiences. So if there's somebody who's very bitter or very jaded or who has come through an industry that wasn't very welcoming or very pleasant, their perspective is going to be very, very different than somebody who had a different shift of experience, right? Like the advice that I probably give people now is very different than the advice that I gave maybe 10 or 15 years ago, earlier on in my career. There's another aspect of mentorship I want to touch on, but it's very much linked to increasing representation in organizations. And that may be a little later in the conversation. So I'm going to point to Wendy for her comments before I take this totally off the rails.
No, it's good. Yes, I am a firm believer in mentors. I was just having a conversation yesterday with folks about that. And you do have mentoring for all different aspects of your career, right? I have mentors that are DEI leaders in other organizations. I have mentors that are HR leaders in other organizations. I have mentors within our own organization from different areas of, the business. And then I have personal mentors, right, that are different culturally from me. They might be friends. They might be some of the same people that I'm mentioning. And so I think as you build relationships, it could be with people that are, on your teams or your peers or outside of your company. They can serve multiple purposes. There's people I pressure test things with all the time, or they'll call me and be like, am I thinking about this wrong? Am I approaching this in a different way? Do you see it in a different way? And so I think as you build relationships with people naturally, those conversations can take place.
Well, and they should take place, right? And it's interesting because for me, with my mentors, I always pressure test, and I've got a very diverse slate of mentors. They range from all sorts of industries, all sorts of backgrounds. It's for me, it's a very diverse slate, but I never really thought about it from a DEI perspective. It was, I think, inherently there. Because one of my mentors is a female executive, and when I'm approaching things, she's giving me her point of view, but I never approached her specifically about women in the workplace, for example. That kind of conversation. I had dinner the other night with one of my mentors, an African-American executive. I never approached the conversation on that specific part of it. Which I'm going to start doing. I'm actually going to meet with them to say, I want to have conversations around this specific part instead of it always being around technology, leadership, those typical things. That's why I thought it was so interesting the way you said that, because even for myself, I just never thought about it that way.
Yeah, which I think is a great thing too, right? And I also love that the foundation of those relationships are not race, right? Because I think something that happens is like we build this inventory of contacts, right? Because of different factors, but they're not intentional connections. And I also believe that because of the foundation of the relationship that you have, I think they will be very excited to hear that you want to have a conversation about those experiences, and you're not somebody new. There's trust there, so you can have a very different conversation than somebody maybe you just met at a conference last week.
And it's also, I would think not insulting, because I would actually, let's flip it around. If someone said, hey, Matt, I want you to be my mentor because you're a white guy, I'd be like, whoa. What? That's a little weird. I'm not interested in that. Go away. So I would assume that if I or anybody asked someone to be a mentor, if I called you, Nicole, and said, hey, I need you to be my mentor, and you were like, oh, this is really exciting. Why? And I'm like, oh, because you're a Black woman. You go, hey, click, right?
Right.
Talking to that.
Well, you know what? I'm going to challenge that, Matt, because we have typically, and it's scientifically proven, we gravitate towards people who physically look like us, right? Yeah. So I may only have a group of mentors who are all Black women. Well, guess what? The places I want to go are not occupied by all Black women. So I may call you and say, Matt, I need you to talk me through something because all I'm doing is talking to these Black women all day. I need to get the perspective of a white guy, right? Because it's going to be it may be very, very singular sometimes in perspective. But to your point, even to challenge my own thoughts, it's got to be a little bit more than that.
Well, and I think what both of you are bringing up the point, which I share with people all the time around, people are like, oh, what can I do to, to kind of grow in this DEI space personally, whatever. You got to have diversity around you, right? And when you think about your mentors, you need to think about that. I have mentors that are different ages. I have folks that are in my life that are younger. I got folks that are older. I got folks that have grown up in other countries. I have folks that are rural. I have folks from all areas, right? Because your conversations as you're building relationships with people do get personal. They should to some level, right? So when you like you said, Matt, you have a diverse slate of mentors. That's important when you're thinking about mentorship, right? And building relationships with people. You got to do that because for most of us, and I think the world is changing. I really, really do. So I try to get myself out of my own mind. But for most of us, we grew up in communities with people that looked like us. We worshiped in places, if you worship, with people who looked like us. We went to schools with people who looked like us. We self-selected friends with people who looked like us. Then we get to the workplace and we're forced to work with people different from us. And that's where the confusion lies. And there's no way around it in the workplace, right? And so in our lives, we self-select and continue to do that. I don't want to live in this neighborhood. I want to live in that neighborhood. Well, why do you want to live in that neighborhood? Why? It's interesting. I grew up in inner city Los Angeles, and I went to school outside of my area with people who never had seen the other side of LA. Never have they ever. Why? They never had to, right? So, when we think about the way we've grown up, a lot of times we've self-selected. And so by opening your opportunity to meet people who are different than yourself is very important.
Nicole, were you going to take us off the rails on this, or did you start to go down that path? I'm wondering.
I sure was.
Okay, you got me interested in where we're going next. So I'm on the ride with you, and you're driving the bus. So you let me know where we're going.
So let me know if we want to jump here. But I thought mentorship was such an important part of the conversation because when we talk about solutioning for DE&I and getting people, obviously insecurity is something that is prevalent that we need to shift, right? We talk about, mentors. It's not just mentorship. Like that's a great part of it, but it's got to go beyond. I read something and I don't know if it was data backed or not, but it really struck a nerve with me. And what it said was that Black people are the most over mentored and under sponsored. Have you seen this as well, Wendy? Yeah,
I have.
And I think it is true. So I don't know if we're there at the point where we want to talk solutioning, but I think
because here's who I just want to jump in because the question I was going to ask us next is how do we help people who are growing and emerging as leaders that come from a diverse background? What do we do more than just mentors, people that are reporting us? Now you're bringing up sponsors, so there's other ways of doing it too. How do we help pay it forward for someone? You all have advanced in your careers. If you had sponsors, people that have done things that really helped you. What can we learn from that?
Let's get down to the meat, right?
This is real stuff, right?
So I think that organizations are starting to have. Well, when I started my career, we were not having the conversation at all. It was not happening. And it was very taboo to have the conversation. And sometimes when we tried, I think we would be penalized unfairly for having the conversation. I think we were just in a space where we were not ready to recognize the reality of where we were. To Wendy's point, things have shifted significantly, right? Now we're having the conversation, but I think sometimes we just have one layer of the conversation. And it's very much where you may see an organization say, diversity is important to us. We have a goal for diversity. Here are our numbers. But that is just like so bottom of the barrel, right? Because sure, you may recruit, right? You may staff these positions, but what is the experience of those people once they come into the walls of your organization, right? How do we, reconcile unconscious bias to performance evaluations, right? That is a very, very prevalent problem. How do we think about pay inequity, right? Now that becomes a downstream impact of experience, performance, and now we're talking about pay. And I think until people stop talking and create a space, a safe space for people of color to share their experience and share the challenges, and people listen, we've got to go from no conversation, singular layer conversation, to honest conversation and courageous conversation. Because if they don't have that feedback, they how can you solve a problem that you don't know that you have? And I also think even at the beginning, the pipeline piece, it is a problem. One last point I will make. A lot of opportunities I've had in my career, and probably many of you, have really been because of relationships that I've had with people, right? And so if we as organizations are not going out and building genuine, intentional relationships with organizations that create communities for the people that we want to hire and bring in, we are not going to see a shift. And I think right now, because there is such a vast shortage of talent in the cybersecurity industry, it is the perfect time to level up your diversity, equity, and inclusion, and the complementary talent acquisition strategy.
I know. I'm like, you said a lot in there. I'm like, what do I want to talk about? So many things. Let me go back to a couple things. And Nicole, I couldn't agree with you more on your comments earlier. When it comes to mentoring, just thinking about that, mentoring is very important, right? And we talked a little bit about sponsorship. And we can use that wording too, because it is different than mentoring. I'm not going to go through all those definitions. I think the important thing when we think about our internal talent is when we think about supporting our internal talent, especially those that are from underrepresented groups, is advocating. When there is a great talent, you have to advocate. And what does advocate look like? Advocate might be spending a little bit more time with that talent. Advocating you might see something in that talent. Maybe they don't have all the skill set you need, right? But they have the core competencies to do the job. So that means they need a little bit more development in XYZ area. That means they might need an extra one-on-one with you or more time with you. That means that when you're in that talent discussion, you're bringing that person up and giving them the assignments to give them visibility to other leaders in the organization. That means you might put a opportunistic hire on that person, right? Now, that doesn't mean that you're picking unqualified people to do a job, okay? Like that's always the thing, like, well, you're just telling me to develop this person. No, this is someone who is a talent for the organization. Okay, and deserves a chance. Kind of goes back to this equity piece, because people always talk about equity, which is very important, don't get me wrong. And although the outcome of equity is similar to equality, the approach to get there is not the same. And so because we know people have different backgrounds and different experiences and come to the door with just a different view, we might have to treat them a little bit differently to make sure there's a fairness in how they progress within the organization. So advocating is so important for your internal talent. And when it comes to external talent, I think Nicole I'm not going to speak on it because I think Nicole touched on a lot of the aspects that we should do externally for talent to come in. And then lastly, that I'll just double down with Nicole, is creating a culture that really embraces everyone. Right. And thinking about the experience of your employees within the organization. You can't just bring them in and say, good luck. There has to be an experience that really helps to foster that diversity and inclusion.
Imagine if those were the metrics that we showed for DE&I, not how many people are in different positions by diverse, at whatever level, but the sentiment of employees who are diverse at every level. It would significantly change the conversation.
Mm-hmm.
I love that idea. And I love everything you all are saying. And I couldn't agree more. I think a lot of people use advocate, mentoring, and sponsoring interchangeably when they actually mean they're so different in what they mean. And I think, as we are here doing CISO talks to help people, a couple of other things that you said, but we sort of rushed through because of time, is you have to think different about who you're bringing in. The field of cybersecurity, for example, we want to help make it more diverse across the spectrum. So you have to look in different places. You bring up LinkedIn, you can't go to the same old places and expect different outcomes. And finding different places and changing your mindset on what qualifies someone, I think, is important. We are always looking for that perfect candidate. You want that person on paper that everything checks. You're like, wow, you are not a diamond in the rough. I found a diamond for a nickel. This is the greatest thing ever. And I think we all have to stop that. Yeah. I know me personally, I'm very lucky because, Wendy, you work at Unisys. I have someone at Unisys that I can go to that helps us as a corporation, helps me as a person, as a leader, and helps my team. And, for a lot of our audience in your organization, do you have someone in your group, in your sphere of influence, in your leadership ranks that can do that for you? And if you don't, what can you do to change that? That is a very important thing, and one that we saw that we did not have, and we found, and we were very lucky to find.
Well, we're at the end of our time, and we could go 10 hours. I'm sure we could. I certainly could. I had a bunch more questions, so we need to continue this conversation. Maybe we just take one thought from each person. What's a takeaway from this? If you took one thing away from this conversation, what might it be, or what was it for you? Matt, I'm going to ask you to start because you were taking a bunch of notes.
I took a bunch of notes. I think for me, that one of the biggest things I took out is how to differentiate the mentorships that I have. Really look at people I mentor. Am I sponsoring them in the correct way? Am I advocating for them, or am I just giving them advice? Right? Hey, you should go do this, instead of me being out there with them, is a big change for me. And as I said in this, I'm actually going to call my mentors. And I want to change that conversation. And I'm going to call Nicole too, and tell her, you're going to help me, please. So,
let's do it, Matt.
Right? But having those conversations and feeling a bit more comfortable that I can have those conversations is something I'm going to focus on.
Great. And Nicole, you were referenced, so you have to go.
Yeah.
We're
so
to
one
accept
thing,
the invitation, so.
Yeah, absolutely. Anytime for Matt. And one thing I want to say is I want to encourage leaders of organizations, before you push metrics and data about diversity, I would ask that you pull it first. Right? I would say find a way to create a safe space where your employees can share information about their experiences, where they can talk about belonging, right? Before you push the data or metrics, pull data about pay equity across, different levels in the organization, and then have not only just honest conversations, but courageous conversations that don't just focus on concepts, but challenge yourself to create solutions, and don't be afraid to fail. That's where all the juice is.
I love that. And I would say, just to add to it, two things. I do feel, and I shared this before, just getting comfortable being uncomfortable. It really, whenever you're challenging kind of your beliefs and your thought process, that's an uncomfortable space to be in. And that's a lot of times why we shy away from conversations, or we hear someone say something and we don't want to, like, oh, we don't want to say something, or we hear someone say something about talent and we don't want to challenge them. Get comfortable being uncomfortable. And also what Nicole shared earlier, really continue self-awareness. It's so important to help you as you continue to grow in this space as well.
Well, I had a lot of ahas. I could create a long list. I think one of them was thinking about mentoring as sharing what you know, and sponsoring as helping somebody. We're helping somebody with what we know, but helping them in the movement, the advancement, or whatever it might be. So that's sort of a different frame of reference, and that creating the conversation, even if it's awkward. Ask for forgiveness, right? Because I'm going to make mistakes. It's okay. Let's learn together, and we're going to help each other have this conversation too. So what a great conversation. A great way to finish our week when we're recording this. So I want to thank Nicole Duff and thank Wendy Reynolds Dobbs, and of course my co-host and friend Matt Newfield. All of you are special people. And thank you for creating this space with us to have this conversation.
Thank
you so much for using your platform for this very important conversation.
Yes.
We're going to do this again, by the way. I have a stack of notes, and we have at least a dozen more episodes so we will get back with you and do this again, and really, really appreciate your time.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Fantastic. Be well, everyone.
Bye.
Hi, my name is Max Gagliardi. I'm the co-founder of the Ancova Group of Companies, as well as the host of the Talk Energy podcast, which is a podcast that I started about a year ago, which covers kind of a wide variety of energy topics. I have leaders on from kind of the energy space and try to touch on a little bit of everything with that. So this presentation that I put together today is called Bitcoin, Energy, and Decentralization. The Ancova Group of Companies historically has been a energy-focused group of companies. We do natural gas marketing and sales. We do midstream and energy infrastructure. And so you may be wondering why an oil and gas guy is up here talking about Bitcoin at a tech conference. And I'm often thinking that question to myself some days lately. But the last year, our company has been very involved in the Bitcoin space. And hopefully through this talk, I can tell you about kind of how I got to this point, what we're doing in the space, and how it interplays with energy. And I'll kind of go through in the order of the presentation is really start off at the beginning, kind of talking to the technical aspects of Bitcoin. And I'm not a technical guy. I've worked with engineers and scientists my whole career, so I'll do my best to try to describe it as simply and concise as I can. Some people have varying levels of understanding of Bitcoin. So for some of you, this may just be stuff that you already know. For other people, it may be something that you've never heard before. So I'll try to talk about the technical aspects and then break it down in layman's terms. And then the middle part of the presentation is kind of about energy and why I think it's important. And then the last part of the presentation is kind of around some of the FUD, the fear, uncertainty, and doubt around Bitcoin, and then why I think the case for Bitcoin. And then I'll just touch briefly on like what our company does, and Ancova Digital, which is our Bitcoin platform. So, and then do questions. I'd love to do some questions, so I'll try to finish early. So Bitcoin 101, Bitcoin, and this is taken directly from the white paper. So this slide, and the white paper was written by Satoshi Nakamoto, who is the inventor or inventors of Bitcoin, who are an anonymous person or persons. And this is part of the very first paragraph. So I'll read through this and then I'll break it down in kind of layman's terms. But Bitcoin's a purely peer-to-peer electronic cash system that allows online payments to be sent directly from one party to another without going through a financial institution or trusted third party. The Bitcoin network timestamps these transactions by hashing them into an ongoing blockchain of hash-based proof of work, forming a record that cannot be changed without redoing the proof of work. And the longest chain, or the longest ledger, which is basically what the blockchain is, serves as the proof of the sequence of events that have been witnessed. And the longest chain comes from the blocks that show that they have the proof of work, which is the CPU power. The messages are then transmitted across the blockchain, and every node on the chain validates that each block has that proof, and that effectively forms what the Bitcoin network is. And so another key thing to remember is that whenever a block is formed and the proof of work is done, you get a reward, which is Bitcoin. Only 21 million Bitcoins will ever be created on the network. So, the first time I heard that, I kind of glazed over. Reading the white paper, I was like, okay, cool. This is like internet money that you can send back and forth to each other. This is kind of neat. I didn't really think through the ramifications and the implications of what something that was truly peer-to-peer that didn't have a trusted third party, because there's really nothing like that we have. And so for me, it took a while to really think through that. just because, again, there's nothing that we experience day to day. Even if you use Venmo, it feels like you're sending money from some person to another person, but there is just this huge stack in between of financial institutions and all these things going on. Or for example, when you use your Apple Pay at the store, it doesn't just settle right then. In fact, sometimes settlement of that payment can happen weeks later. So there's this big kind of cumbersome system in the financial network. And with Bitcoin, it is literally peer-to-peer with zero trust or zero institutions in the middle. And so I'll talk about later why that's a big deal, but it took me a while for that kind of to click. So the way that the network works, and I'll try to just explain this simply, effectively, there are transactions. So I trade a Bitcoin to you, you trade a Bitcoin to me. We then that transaction gets broadcasted across nodes, which are effectively small computers that people can run, individuals. Like I run a node at my house. I don't get any money or get anything from that other than there's some privacy things that's nice about running a node. But each node effectively contains the entire blockchain. So every time a new block is added, it gets broadcasted to the network. It stores it on that node. And nodes can do different things. And I could talk a lot about it. But effectively, each one of these nodes is like a small computer with a hard drive. The miners, which are these powerful computers called ASICs, are processing these transactions and batching them into these blocks. And a new block is created roughly every 10 minutes. And so not only are the miners processing the transactions, they are solving a cryptographic puzzle effectively. So think of it like, like I don't know if anybody's watched Harry Potter. I've seen it some. I think the game is called Quidditch, where they fly around, they try to catch the golden snitch. And if they catch this elusive thing that flies around, then the game is over and you win. And that's kind of how it is with these blocks. Like if they can solve the puzzle and show that they did the work, they then can stamp that block with the proof. So when they broadcast it to the network, everybody on the network can trust that this is a valid block. So there really doesn't have to be anybody saying this is true, this is false. Because of the proof that it is a valid block. And so once it shows that it's valid, once they solve the puzzle, they broadcast it to the network. It's then validated, and then the process repeats, and you add blocks to the blockchain. And it's effectively just a giant ledger, which is essentially every transaction back to the very first block. And so it's just a record of all of it. Like I said, every 10 minutes is the target time to create a block. If it's happening faster than 10 minutes, so if it's happening in 9 minutes and 50 seconds, then that means more computing power has been added to the network. If it's going slower, so it's 10 minutes and 30 seconds, that means computing power has been taken away from the network. So roughly every 2 weeks, the network will recalibrate and try to target that 10-minute interval. And so what that means is it'll either get harder or easier to mine for the blocks. And so each time, again, when the miner finds the puzzle, they get rewarded with Bitcoin. And so there's this natural incentive system to expend the computing power, expend the energy, and then get the reward of Bitcoin coming back to you. And so we'll kind of move on. So there was a problem in computing when it came to systems. And this is a problem that people thought couldn't be solved for, I think, decades, basically going back to when the first networks were being created. And it was called the Byzantine's general problem. And essentially what it was that how can you have a network where you don't need a trusted intermediary or a centralized figure that's validating what is true, what is false on this network? And the analogy was you've got 4 generals or some group of generals. They're all different, nations, and they've banded together to attack a single foe. And so the only way that they communicate is by sending messages to each other. And so how do you know that message is valid? If 3 of the generals are saying attack and 1 of the generals is saying retreat, and that general is a traitor or a bad actor, how can we validate whether it's true or whether it's false? And so there has to be some kind of proof that is a true message. And this is the problem that you faced with networks. So if it's like your Visa, it's easy to figure out whether these transactions are true or false because you're Visa and you house everything in a centralized database and you control it, and your systems engineers and software engineers have put it all together. So you kind of know, hey, is this in our system or isn't it? If it's a distributed system like Bitcoin, you've got independent actors all around the world that are processing these transactions, that are sending Bitcoin back and forth, that are mining for Bitcoin. How do you find a way to make it to where you don't have to have somebody who's the gatekeeper? And proof of work, this idea of proving that the message was true, was really the invention. Proof of work coupled with the difficulty adjustment was really what solved this Byzantine's general problem, which many people thought couldn't be solved. And so this is kind of important to think about when you think about the energy consumption and why it's doing what it's doing. And so Bitcoin is just this kind of incredible network that has never been hacked. It's never really been materially compromised. It's been going for 13 years strong. I think it was 13 years. This October 31st was the 13th year since Bitcoin launched. And proof of work has really been at the heart of why this network is so resilient, why it is so anti-fragile. And if if you think about it again, I'll break it down. So the process goes where you have to use this electricity and apply this computing power to guess the answer to the puzzle, right? The more energy that the Bitcoin network uses, the stronger the network is, the harder it would be to compromise this network. The Bitcoin network benefits also because it is got the network effect. It's been doing it for 13 years. So people, we'll talk about all the questions for Bitcoin later. People say, well, why can't there just be another Bitcoin? Well, there is millions of these computers around the world hashing, and hashing is basically solving these calculations. And it's some crazy number. It's like every second there's more hashes than there are like stars in the visible sky. I mean, it's like there's just an insane amount of computing power going into this network. And so the more energy that's expended, the more secure the network is, the more anti-fragile it is, and the more resilient. And so it would basically take just a monumental effort to compromise the Bitcoin network. Again, it's never happened. A lot of people have tried. In fact, there's tons of people every day that would love to try to do something to hurt Bitcoin. But compromising the blockchain would not only be very costly, it would just be unprofitable. So the amount of computing power that you'd have to put towards compromising the network would be far more expensive than just mining the blocks and getting the Bitcoin reward. So you're incentivized, not only would it be very hard and almost just logistically, I don't want to say it's impossible because nothing's impossible, but not only would it be a huge logistical undertaking, it would be very unprofitable to do so. And so it's not just the energy consumption. When you first think about proof of work and finding out how to have that proof to show that your block is valid, it is the logistics, it's the manpower, it's the technical expertise. As a company that is mining Bitcoin, it is literally hundreds, if not thousands of hours of thought and prep and effort, as well as massive physical infrastructure that goes into the proof of work. So it's not just as simple as I could just expend more energy than them. There's a ton of stuff that goes into proof of work. And so this cartoon, I kind of like it. Basically, just read through it real quick. It says that if everybody's working on block 91 in the network, and one miner wants to go back and change block 74, he would have to make changes and redo all the blocks between 74 and 90, as well as change the block 91. So that's 18 blocks worth of computing power. And the kicker is he would have to do all of that before the people at block 91 solve for that block. So if you can imagine, it's just the higher or the more stacked up the blockchain is, the more difficult it would be for someone to go back in and compromise historical transactions. And so this is just a cool way to visualize it. And so that's basically in a nutshell. And for me, like I've spent my whole career kind of at this intersection between energy and value and monetizing energy. And so like I had to understand this part of it before I really got Bitcoin, because people were coming to us and saying, you can take energy, whether that's stranded energy like natural gas that didn't have a sales market that was being flared, or whether it's grid energy that's being wasted, and you can otherwise monetize that energy into a much higher value. And for somebody that spent a career kind of, duking it out to make 10-cent margin on natural gas. So for example, nat gas trades at like $4 today. So, if you could find 10 extra cents somewhere in that value chain, that was a huge deal. You could make people millions of dollars for just that little bit of value. And so we built a whole business around this. And when I found out that you could sell natural gas and effectively equate it to $35 per MCF, which is roughly where it's at today, I think it may be a little lower, around $30 per MCF. It was like a earth-shattering, like I couldn't sleep for 2 or 3 days type of moment, because I just thought this just can't be real. This has to be something that's fake. Or my entire career and everything I've like worked on doing is going to change. And so I had to dig into this and understand why it was expending the energy for me to really get excited or get on board with actually pursuing or going down the path of doing things in the Bitcoin space. And so that's why I started with proof of work and trying to just tell you about the basics of the network. It's kind of the secret sauce, and it's what makes it be able to be decentralized. And so kind of moving on, Bitcoin's energy usage is also something that it's often attacked for, right? And so hopefully you can understand it is because the energy usage is what makes Bitcoin Bitcoin. It's why we can have this trustless system. It's the proof of work. It's how we can prove that these transactions are real. And so you see all these people attacking Bitcoin, saying it's going to boil the oceans and that it's accelerating climate change and all these things. And I actually think Bitcoin's energy use is a good thing. And again, this has taken me some time to wrap my head around, but it's the first time in really human history that we have a large scale use of energy that is effectively agnostic to location. So Bitcoin, when you mine it, it is a very small broadband in terms of what it takes to send the signal to the network. So you can use a cell phone cell phone modem, you can use a satellite modem, and you can effectively put the Bitcoin mining anywhere. And so again, when you first hear this, you're like, okay, that's fine. You can stick a mine wherever, back behind whatever it is and plug it in. But when you think about it, and you think about energy, like I have my whole career, all of energy is effectively this game between getting supply to demand. So this microphone is plugged in here. It runs through a cord that's plugged into the wall. You can trace this with a physical object. You can trace this all the way back to a literal source of energy. There is probably a natural gas well or a coal power plant or a windmill or solar panel somewhere in the earth that is far away from here, probably relatively far away, that you have to physically trace that energy to get it to this microphone or to this computer. And so this idea of being able to take large scale demand for energy and move it anywhere to where there's supply is, again, there's just never been anything like that. And not only is it a large scale demand for energy, it is also today, currently at the Bitcoin price and the hash price for the network, it is the highest value use case for energy. So like I mentioned, the natural gas, what I talked about with natural gas, like even retail power is probably at my house, it's around 9 to 11 cents per kilowatt hour. Right now, mining Bitcoin, depending on how powerful your ASIC computer is, you can get potentially in excess of 30 to 40 cents for that energy. So it is, not only can you move it anywhere, it's the highest value use case. And so then you look at all the applications for this technology and you start to extrapolate it. There's just so many things it can do. So for in our industry, you have what we call flared gas or wasted natural gas. So if you drill an oil well, there is natural gas that's a byproduct of that well. And a lot of times, if there's just not an access to a pipeline, like you can drive a truck and pick up oil, but you have to pipe natural gas. So if it's in a remote area, they just burn the gas off and flare it. And so this is, number one, is wasteful. Number two, methane escapes from the flare, which is a very high CO2 gas. And it's worse than CO2. It's a very high greenhouse gas. And so we can go directly to those wells that are flaring. We can capture that natural gas, convert it to electricity with a generator on site, and power a mobile data center that can then power this network that people are using as this new monetary network to trade value around the world. And so that's one use case that is not only has a great like ESG and environmental angle, but it's also just really cool, right? You can go and capture something that would otherwise be wasted. And there's lots of examples of this. For example, hydro-powered energy, renewables. I mean, the thing about renewables is that they don't work when you need them. They work when they work, right? So when the sun's shining or when the water's flowing or when the wind is blowing. And so there's lots of times when the power, the energy that renewables are creating doesn't match up to when we need to use it, right? The demand ebbs and flows. And so you can put Bitcoin and use it as almost like a digital battery or a virtual power plant where you can locate it at these sites. And so, for example, like Texas, where you've got this grid that during certain times, like if the wind stops blowing because it's really hot, they getting forced to have brownouts and even blackouts. And so if you could have a large scale source of demand like Bitcoin mining that could underpin additional base load, so you could say we could build a new power plant or we could build 3 new power plants, and when we don't need them, we'll be mining Bitcoin, which, by the way, converts this to a much higher value that you can store forever, has no shelf life. You can send it through space and time at the speed of light anywhere in the world and transfer that value to somebody else. There's just so many things you can do with it that you couldn't do with traditional energy. And then, by the way, whenever we need that energy, you can power the miners down and push it back to the grid. And now you've created effectively a battery or a virtual power plant. And so I could go on and on about the energy and how it's going to change things, but it's really just probably the most disruptive thing. And I've been in the industry for 11 years, so it's certainly the most disruptive thing I've ever seen, and something that I think has a lot of ways that can create a lot of good. One more example I'll use before I move on is, how much time do I have? I've got till the end of the hour. Okay, so one other example I'll use is like, you've got a lot of energy poverty in the world, right? So if you're in the Congo or somewhere in Africa, you may have a lot of natural resources. You might have oil and gas, you may have hydro, you may have access to energy. The problem is you don't have the infrastructure from a transmission standpoint to go underpin that hydro dam, because now you've got to lay transmission lines through the mountains or through the jungles to get it to all the different villages. And so if you had the ability to go to each locale or geographic area, build out a power source, and then when you can't probably use all that power source, but you can use it to mine Bitcoin, harness that value, and then what's ever left over, you can put it into the community. And if you need to turn the mining off to power more stuff in the community, you can. But it effectively acts as like an anchor tenant to support energy projects in different parts of the world where there may be energy poverty. So it sounds kind of crazy that could be something that could help energy poverty around the world, but it's already happening today. We're hearing about it in certain third world countries where people are going out at a small scale and taking energy sources and mining Bitcoin and using that as a source of revenue to help them from an economic standpoint, but then also used to power their villages and their communities. And so, again, just this idea that you can bring this really high value of energy and move it mobily around the world is it's just a thing it could change a lot of things. And so back to the total energy usage, you hear these headlines, Bitcoin uses all this energy. Like currently today, the network uses about 0.1% of the entire world's energy. So it's very small. And even if Bitcoin keeps growing at the rate that it's growing at, which it's growing at about 2 times the speed that the internet grew at from a disruption standpoint, it's pretty shocking. But even if it does, I mean, the most that we see in projections that it'll get to is still 0.1%. So this is a rounding error in the world's energy usage. It is using a lot of energy, but so does a lot of other things, right? Like clothes dryers use far more energy than the Bitcoin network. Consumer electronics use far more energy than the Bitcoin network. Hot tubs use more energy than the Bitcoin network. So the next time you read something that Bitcoin's accelerating climate change or is destroying the planet, this is just what we call FUD. It's a good headline that people like to click on it. But if you really look at it, the energy usage is not only the secret sauce and what makes this possible, it's actually a good thing for all the reasons that I mentioned earlier and what it can do in the energy markets. So talking more about the FUD, because this is what everybody likes to talk about. So you hear it all the time, like Bitcoin's the next tulip bubble. That's one that you see pop up probably every 6 months in an article. Why don't they, or the government's going to ban it. That's another one. So I'll talk on that one. I think Bitcoin as a money, and we're going to go in the next slide, we'll talk about what money is, but the government, what you're going to see is that number one, the government's going to tax it. They already are taxing it. You'll see governments like China that want to move to ban it and that have said that it is banned. And I think they'll probably put some regulatory framework around it. Maybe they will outright ban it forever, but people will ask me about that and they'll say, look, China's banning it. What's stopping the US from banning it? And my first response is usually, well, that's bullish, right? Because the governments are banning it. That means it's working. It's like doing what it's supposed to do, which is creating a new form of money, which they don't like because they want to control the money system. But the other thing is that governments are going to embrace it. So look at what Texas is doing. Governor Abbott keeps coming out and talking about it. They know that they're a big energy state. They've embraced it. They want to be the Bitcoin mining capital. I think Oklahoma needs to step up. We're working on that. Senator Ted Cruz and some of the other Texas legislators have been very vocal, speaking out about it. Senator Loomis in Wyoming has come out in support of it. So I think in the world where you see places with freedom, with pro-business, with places that want to facilitate trade, I think they will embrace this technology. And then you look at a country like El Salvador, which has recently made Bitcoin legal tender in the country, and they've mandated that everybody have to take it and use it for transactions. And so people say the government's going to ban it. Well, this year a government made it their currency. And so that's the trend that we're seeing. And we're going to see some governments that won't like it, and we're going to see others that will embrace it. And I think that's true with a lot of technology. The other one is like, why don't they just create another Bitcoin? You've got Ethereum, you've got Dogecoin, you've got whatever other meme coin that they decide to make. And a couple of things. It's like, look, I could go create another Wikipedia. I could copy Wikipedia's source code and I could go and post it. And I could pump a bunch of marketing dollars into it, right? And say, hey, everybody use my Wikipedia. Like, no one's going to use my Wikipedia. Like, it's just, there's a thing called a network effect, which people in here probably understand. But it gets back to the energy usage. Like, the Bitcoin network is so robust and it's growing at such a rapid speed. Like, right now where the Bitcoin network is at, it's about where the internet was in 1997. And this is a stat that people throw around. I don't know if you guys have heard it, but it's growing at 2 times the speed of the internet. So where it's at today is very, very early on, and that network effect is continuing to grow. And so, the other thing about it is that like these other altcoins, they're trying to do something that Bitcoin's not. I would almost like equate them more to like a company or like equities. You got like Ethereum 1.0, 2.0. They got a new team of developers like Solana and all these other coins. And, it's changing all the time. They're upgrading it. They're printing more. And it's like, I don't know about you guys, but like, I don't want my money to change. Like, I want my money to be the same money that I had 2 years ago. I want it to be the same money next year. I don't want like a 2.0 version of my money. I want my money to be sound money that I can store value in. And so I think that a lot of these cryptocurrencies are very, very centralized. They pretend to be decentralized because they're on a blockchain. But at the end of the day, they are controlled by a small group of people that can have massive changes to them. And even if they were totally decentralized, they don't have the powerful network effect that Bitcoin has. Now, that doesn't mean that there won't be other coins. There obviously are and will continue to be. but I just think that long-term Bitcoin will be the gold standard, for lack of a better term. So, and we can talk about it. I want to open it up to questions, so everybody tell me why I'm wrong here at the end. So accelerating climate change, I already talked about that one. What if Bitcoin gets hacked? We talked about that. It's be very difficult to do, if not impossible. People never use it for transactions. That's another good one. It can't scale. They're starting to in places. And I mean, any new currency, like, it's going to take time for adoption. And so we're seeing things like the Lightning Network, which is a second layer solution. It sits on top of the blockchain. It effectively batches transactions, so you can do microtransactions. So you can send fractions of a penny. So I've got a buddy who has a podcast, and he has people streaming him what are called sats, which are the smallest divisible unit of Bitcoin. So there's 100 million sats, like Satoshi's the guy that founded it, like cents. It's kind of a play on the word cents, but he can get these streamed to him in real time. So this is something we could never do with dollars. I mean, Visa is going to charge you. And it's the reason why you have to do a monthly subscription fee. But with Bitcoin, because it's just so costly to do these charges, but with Bitcoin, you could literally stream it in real time in tiny, tiny fractions of a penny. And so, maybe there's a future world where you don't pay for cable or for listening to music. You pay as you listen, and you pay just fractions of a penny to listen to your favorite song. And then all over, you go the whole month, and you've actually paid less than your Spotify subscription, because this technology has allowed you to create less friction with money. So I think the transactions will come as adoption picks up. Bitcoin isn't backed by anything. That's a fun one. We'll talk about what money actually is here on the next slide. It's a Ponzi scheme. People have to keep buying more of it, and it can't go up forever. And so the interesting thing about Bitcoin is that the price or the supply is totally fixed. So there's 21 million, and it is going to continue to go exponentially down in supply. Right now, about 90% of all Bitcoin that will ever be created has been created. The last 10%, the majority of that will be within this decade. And then the last 1% will be over the next 120 some odd years. So it is an incredibly scarce asset that is getting much scarcer all the time. And demand, again, is growing at 2 times the speed of the internet. So, I don't know what will happen to the price of Bitcoin. Certainly in the short term, it can drop very fast and go up very fast. But, basic supply demand models like we use for oil or for gold or for any other commodity will show you that if demand is increasing and supply is decreasing, price does one thing. It goes up over time. So again, we can argue about it, but that's been the track record. It's been on average, it's gone up about 200% compounded annually per year since inception in terms of the price. And I think we're going to continue to see quite a bit of appreciation. So 2 more slides and then I'll open it up. So what is money? Money has characteristics that we can measure. It's not just, the government prints this thing and says it has value. Money actually has characteristics. And so you can look at this list on the right. It kind of compares gold, fiat money like the US dollar, and Bitcoin. It has to be fungible. You can interchangeable, has to be non-consumable. So for example, if I'm trading you a piece of bread, well, that's going to go bad pretty quickly. And people used to trade food back in the day in the barter system. Portability, you have to be able to move it from place to place. Durability, excuse me, has to be able to be durable. Divisible, Bitcoin's highly divisible. It can be divided into 100 million units. Secure, Bitcoin is, right now impossible to be hacked as long as you have your private keys. There's no computer on the planet. It would take, you'd have to run this highest power supercomputer, for millions of years or something. I don't know the exact stat, but it's be very hard to break it. Maybe quantum computers could. We could move to a more higher level of encryption if that happened. Scarcity, easily transactable, decentralized, and smart and programmable. So these are just some of the things. People have traded things like seashells, livestock. Gold, for example, is a very good proxy to Bitcoin. People say, well, what is Bitcoin backed by? Well, it's like, well, what is gold backed by? Gold is a perfect example of a completely non-government backed, totally just organic thing that became money. The reason why it became money is because it had these characteristics. It's because people need something to exchange and to store value. And so over time, humans tried a lot of different things and they settled on gold. And the reason why they settled on it was not because some grand government conspiracy that everybody's going to use gold. They settled on it because it checked a lot of boxes. It checked all the boxes here on the right. And so, if you look at the traits that money has, there is still an element of it, which is what most people have the biggest struggle with. And that is that money is a belief system. At the end of the day, it can have all those traits, but if you don't believe in Bitcoin and you think it's a scam, you're not going to buy Bitcoin. You're not going to store your value in it. You're going to store it in dollars or gold or collectible cars or whatever you think that you like to spend your money on. So I think that from the belief system standpoint, that's the one thing that I've really seen that is been impressive with the Bitcoin community is that the people that understand the technology and that have been involved with it since it early on are very, very passionate about it. They very much believe that it is a store of value. And there is virtually, and I know a lot of these people really well in the community, and there is virtually nothing that you could say or tell them that they do not believe that this is the currency that's going to power the future. And so if you look at the belief system for the people that have studied the technology, you look at the characteristics of Bitcoin, there are a lot of people that will argue it's the best money that's ever been invented. Again, tell me why I'm wrong here at the end, but that's the reason why they say that, is because of these things, right? And then the moral case for Bitcoin, and I've got about 15 minutes left, so I'm going to go. So I truly think that Bitcoin can make the world a better place. Some people that don't know anything about it say that they're like, you're crazy. Like it's just fake money on the internet. But I do think that having a sound monetary system and be able to store your value should be a basic human right. According to the World Bank, there are 2 billion adults that don't even have access to a checking account, don't even have any basic banking whatsoever, don't have any way to store money, any way to store value. That is a huge chunk of the population. It's also estimates show that 80% of people on Earth, which I actually would argue it might be 100% of people, either live in a country where it is a state-owned or like totalitarian type banking system where you don't really own that property, or you live in a place where there's double or triple digit inflation. The reason why I'd say it may be 100% is because, I mean, look at the US right now. I mean, they're saying it's 6.5%. I think, I bought my truck 2 years ago and it was around $40,000, and that same truck, same exact specs, is $75,000 right now. So you can tell me that inflation has been 6%, but I've seen my purchasing power, whether it be a house, whether it be a car, whether it be the food I buy at the grocery store, I've seen that just completely be decimated over the last 18 months. 35% of every dollar that's ever existed has been printed in the last year and a half. They're talking about printing even more. It could be close to 40% of every dollar ever in existence has been printed just recently. And it's not just this administration, it was the one before that. It's fiat. They can print as much of it as they want. And so inflation hurts poor people the most. I think that when you think about money, and I'll use like my parents as an example, they worked for 30 plus years to retire, and they were very conservative with their money, like tried really hard to pay down their home, to put money away so they could retire. And if the government prints 35% of the money with the push of a button in their purchasing power, again, you can argue whether it really is 30%. I've seen certain things in my life that have gone that much inflated in the last year. But if with the push of a button, you can devalue the currency by 30%, that's effectively like stealing a third of their entire career. They lost 10 years of their life in the last year of the money that they've saved. Now, luckily, they have assets like stocks and real estate and things, but not everybody has that, right? So what inflation does and what money printing does is it makes the poorest people and the people without assets, or the conservative people that don't want to put their money in stocks, it punishes them and it makes the wealthy wealthier. And you can see from the 1970s when we got off the gold standard to today, the wealth gap has exploded. And the people with assets, the more money they've printed, they've gotten richer and richer. The 1% has gotten so far ahead of everybody else, and wages just haven't kept up. And so that, all coupled with the fact that Bitcoin's censorship proof. And so this is the last point, is that, we're living in a time where, free speech is, I would argue, kind of under attack. I mean, whether it be in social media or mainstream media, some people may argue with me again there. I think that there's a lot of instances where we've seen personal liberties kind of attacked. And so just having a technology where you can say this is objective, nobody can mess with it, it's set in code, and it is objective truth. Like the blockchain has been validated, it's been proved through the proof of work, and there's nothing anybody can do to change it. Again, there's just nothing like that. So I think that can do a lot of good in the world. I think it can open up banking and access banking to a lot of people that don't have it. If you look at the highest areas of adoptions, it's in places like Nigeria. It's one of the highest adoption areas of Bitcoin. Their government was corrupt. It was corrupt the banking system, and they've moved now to using Bitcoin as their medium of exchange. So these are all the reasons why, again, I think it has the potential to be very disruptive. If you'd have asked me in 1997 to predict Netflix or Uber or, social media, nobody in this room could have predicted it. Maybe someone could have had an idea. And so that's how I think about Bitcoin. Like, I can't tell you all the things it's going to change, but I think it's going to change pretty much everything, because money is the basis of everything we do. So our company, Ancova Digital, we are a turnkey Bitcoin solutions. We're doing Bitcoin mining. We have our own mines. We help our customers mine. We do a wide variety of things. This isn't an ad for us, but just wanted to tell you about us. If anybody wants to know more, you can hit me up afterwards. And that's kind of all I got. So open it up for questions. I got about 12 minutes. If anybody's got one, go ahead. Yeah, so the question was, for people that couldn't hear, is that how does Bitcoin kind of act like a battery? And I don't know if battery is a perfect example, but effectively they are taking energy that would otherwise be wasted and then turning that into a monetary value. So they're not going to use that energy later. But for example, you can use the value of that energy, capture that value, which then allows you to have a more robust, for example, base load. So like the power plant example, it's like if you needed to build a power plant, you need lots of base load to have things like renewables. So this big push towards renewable energy, you have to actually increase the base load a lot, because the more renewable energy you have, it's more intermittent, which causes there to be these fluctuations in the grid. And so Bitcoin could act as that stabilizer to where that's that buyer of last resort and first resort. So whenever the wind's not blowing or whatever, you can use that energy to push towards the grid. Whenever the wind is blowing and the sun's shining, you can sop up that energy in the Bitcoin mining and store that value, and it turns it into a monetary value. And then that power plant provider can take that and use it for different things, but it makes them stronger. Does that make sense? It's not like they actually can use so it's an analogy. It's not really a battery, but yeah. What else we got? Go ahead. I think it is a store of value. I think that it will over time be more of a currency. I think right now it's more of a store of value, and primarily because it's still so early. I think, people see Bitcoin and the question was, do I see it as an investment or a store of value, for people that didn't hear? But I think that today, because it's so early, people get like unit bias, right? So you look at 1 unit of Bitcoin and it's 60,000, 50,000, whatever it is today, 55,000. And then you look at 1 unit of Dogecoin, or pick a meme stock or meme coin, and it's 30 cents. I don't even know what it is. But they look at that and they say, oh, Bitcoin's already here. It's, I've missed that whole thing. It's, I'm going to go invest in this other thing that's 30 cents because you have a unit bias. But take into account all the things I talked about earlier, I think Bitcoin still has this huge running room in terms of where it goes in value. And I think that at some point the market cap will get such to where the volatility decreases pretty significantly. Probably it'll take a decade or more. And then at that point, you'll see this stable value that will march upwards slower over time. The supply, again, we're seeing these big supply shocks. So right now they have the program is there's a halving every 4 years. So every 4 years, the supply of new Bitcoin that's mined cuts in half. So you see these big supply shocks. And so you see the price of Bitcoin shoot up. And that's what happens this last halving. It went from, $3,000, $4,000 up to almost 70,000, 69,000, right? It's because the demand is growing, like I talked about. And you're seeing these big supply chunks going away every 4 years. In the future, once like 99% of it's mined, you're not going to have these big supply decreases anymore. It's going to go from, oh, this year we have this little bit, and yeah, there'll be half as much in 4 years, but half as much will be a smaller percentage of the total. There'll be more in circulation. And I think the market cap will be bigger at that point, to where it'll be more stable. So today, a lot of people view it as an investment. I view it as, I guess I would say, a store of value. I do use it as a currency, but I use it as a treasury asset, so effectively a store of value. And then I think as it stabilizes and gets a higher market cap, you don't see these crazy fluctuations. I think people will transact with it more, especially in these places where they need a good medium of exchange, right? Like in the Western world, we can open up a bank account. It's easy. I can use my Apple Pay. A lot of people just don't have that. So I think it'll be both, I guess, is probably the best answer. I bought different things. I mean, certainly in the Bitcoin community, people want to use it as transactions. So like if I get my tickets to the Bitcoin 2022 conference, they give me a big discount if I buy it with Bitcoin. So I'll use it for that. I'll use it for things like, I think if you're international travel, if people take Bitcoin, it's really nice because you don't have to convert it. It's universally accepted. If somewhere accepts Bitcoin around the world, you could, like if I went to El Salvador right now, I could walk into a McDonald's and I could buy a meal with Bitcoin, just scan the QR code with my phone and it pays for it. El Salvador is not the best example because they also take dollars. But if it was another country that didn't take dollars, a lot of people don't know this, but you can't Venmo internationally, right? Like you can only do it with dollars to dollars. In fact, it's really hard to transfer money between currencies. They make it difficult and it's expensive. There's exchange rates and all these things. So I think the use case for buying stuff and using transactions is more of a worldview. And I think that it will get there as adoption rises. But today it's just still really early. So that's kind of the nice thing, is that it's a uniform unit of exchange. Yes? Yeah. Sure. Right. Yeah, definitely. So the question was regulation is how does that affect adoption of Bitcoin? So there are hardcore Bitcoiners that like don't want it regulated. They're like, hey, don't mess with my money. Don't mess with this stuff. There are more moderate Bitcoiners, especially people that are like institutional investors or people that, like, for example, if you're a big endowment fund and you want to buy Bitcoin because you think it's a good store of value, like you would gold or something else, you may be afraid to do it because you're like, I don't know what they're going to do. Are they going to make it? Are they going to tax it weird? They can do all these things. So I think that there is a case to be made for reasonable, transparent regulation that people know what's going to happen, right? And, you know, for example, right now, like when we mine it, I think it's taxed really bad. They tax you when you mine it, and then they tax you again when you sell it, and it's a pain because they say it's not a currency, but they tax it like one, then they tax it like an asset later. So, but at least I know what it is, right? I don't like it, but I know how that goes. So the more adoption and the more that these bigger institutions, like the banks are all getting really involved now, you're seeing a lot of the big names starting to play in the space. ETFs are getting approved. So that's like an investment fund. And so as those things happen, there will be regulation. And I think in some ways, if it's sensible regulation, I hope that it's a good thing for people to get more comfortable and there can be more adoption, is what I would hope. I mean, it's taxed like both kind of now. I mean, I wish, so like when I produce a barrel of oil, if it goes into a tank, we don't pay taxes on the oil until you sell the oil, right? Or gas too, you could put it into storage. If you produce a Bitcoin, you're taxed immediately as if it was dollars, right? But they say it's not a currency. The government goes out of its way to say this isn't a currency, but we're going to tax it like a currency. And then when I go to sell that Bitcoin, they tax me again as a capital gains tax. So that's why I said I wish it was like more like a commodity, I think. And I haven't thought through all the ramifications of that statement, but in my mind, from somebody who sells commodities, I would rather it be treated as I get taxed when it sells, when I sell, or maybe there's some period of time, like at the end of the year, I got to sell it or I didn't pay. I don't know. I wish that it wasn't just taxed the way it is now, but it is what it is. So go ahead. Yeah. Right. Yeah. So the question was proof of work versus proof of stake. And I probably don't have all the time to go into what proof of stake is, but essentially proof of stake is another way that they're trying to solve the burden of proof. So how do you know that this block is valid? So right now it's proof of work, and this is what Ethereum uses as well, but there are a lot of new coins that are using what they call proof of stake. And so the solution that they came up with is that you just stake money, you stake coins, so you put them in, you lock them up effectively, and then you then have to validate that the blocks are real. And if you're a bad actor, then you lose the coin that you staked and you potentially even get kicked out of the network. So it's another kind of hammer mechanism to where basically people won't cheat because they'll be staking their coins rather than spending the energy. And so people have said this is going to be what could replace proof of work. I think the biggest problem to me, and we're seeing it through, there's a couple problems. One is that proof of stake is very complex. So a proof of work, you can, and I'm not a coder, but from what I've read, it can be coded fairly simply. It could be like 100 lines of code to do the proof of work. And whereas proof of stake, it's hundreds of thousands of lines of code. It's very complex. There's lots of backdoors and different ways it can be attacked. And so that's why Ethereum's taken so long to launch, is because they just keep coming up with, people keep coming up with ways to poke holes in it. The other thing about proof of stake is it has a very, and this is the big problem, is that it has a very strong centralization effect. So if you're Amazon, you decide I want to control Ethereum, which most of the nodes are hosted on AWS anyways, they could just come in and stake fiat. And what we talked about earlier is fiat is infinite, right? So if a government wanted to stake fiat, they can just print fiat and they can stake it. And now they can be the largest stakeholder on that blockchain. And proof of stake is perpetuating, it snowballs, right? So the bigger stake you have, the more the network you control, and it snowballs over time because you can keep staking, and your stake, you get rewarded for what you staked. So if you're the guy like Apple comes in and stakes the biggest amount, now they've got the biggest snowball. Over time, that snowball is going to get bigger and bigger. And what you'll see in proof of stake is you'll see a network that is not all that decentralized. It's controlled like an oligarchy. I can't even say the word right. But yeah, oligopoly. Golly, that one's bad. It's like an oligopoly over time. Those are the arguments. I'm not an expert on proof of stake, but I've read some. Lynn Alden, I believe is her name. She has a really good article on proof of stake versus proof of work. It just came out this week. If you hit me up afterwards, I can send that to you. And she does a really good breakdown. I mean, it's probably like a 20-page article or 15-page article, and she breaks it down. And she's been a big proponent of trying to look at proof of stake, but her conclusion is effectively that it is has some centralizing effects that could be a problem over time. What else we got? Go ahead. I mean, the biggest problem that I see today in Bitcoin is that and I don't want to sound like too much of a Bitcoiner, but I think it's just the misunderstanding around it and not understanding what the technology is, and people effectively looking at it as something that they don't get it for whatever reason. I think the bear case for Bitcoin is if for some reason the proof of work mechanism were to break. So if hash power has been increasing over time as it's designed to do, which is computing power. In short-term periods, we can see computing power dip, like when there's a bear market. If we went through like a long-term, prolonged time period where hash power is continuing to dip and trending downwards, I don't think that would be good for Bitcoin. I think Bitcoin, it needs to get more computing power. It needs to get more robust, because if it's going to be a medium of global exchange, then I think it needs to have more robust network. And so if the network is getting less secure over time, I would say that would be a red flag, which we haven't seen that. The other negatives I could think of, really like a lot of the stuff, the FUD that you read, people say like they use it for crime and all that stuff. It's actually really transparent. I mean, if you ever make a Bitcoin transaction to do something illegal, like it's there forever. Like that's on the blockchain for all of eternity. Someone can track that. Far more crime is committed with US dollars than Bitcoin, like way more, in cash especially, because you can't trace it. So I don't know. What do you think? Do you have anything that specifically that you're thinking that could be a negative? Maybe I haven't thought of it. Yeah. For sure. It's a lot to think about. Yeah. Right. For sure. Yeah. There could be some of that. So that definitely could be disruptive, which not be a good thing. And I'm out of time here in a second. So the last thing I'll say is that modern monetary theory people that are very big fans of inflation and kind of the existing structure, they think a deflationary currency like Bitcoin would be a bad thing. So they point back to like the Great Depression, and they say that this was caused by deflation, and that they say inflation is a good thing. It stimulates jobs. It creates, wage growth. In theory, it creates asset growth. And so classical economists will dog on it and say that it could have unintended consequences. So there is a bear case for it. But for the reasons I mentioned earlier about inflation, I just think that inflation is just too tempting for governments, right? Like they can just print and they can take out as much debt as they want. So I don't know. That would be probably what someone who would say that didn't like Bitcoin, they would say deflationary currencies are a negative. So I'm out of time, I think, but thank you guys. Appreciate it.
Hey everybody, happy Tuesday. This is Charlene O'Hanlon, and I'm here with the headlines. First up on DevOps.com is an article that looks at API management and service mesh and the differences between the two. The use of APIs and microservices is increasing. A recent study from F5 estimates the industry is approaching 200 million total APIs. As organizations expand their use of APIs and microservices, they inevitably require some form of service management architecture. And there are primarily two major design options for implementing this: an API management system or a service mesh. Both styles accomplish similar goals but have evolved very differently. This article examines why these two paradigms emerged and compares and contrasts them. For organizations confused about whether to use API management or service mesh, this article is a must-read. And we look at software architecture and its role in innovation. Software architecture plays an irreplaceable role in enabling businesses to deliver value efficiently. A good software architecture facilitates the ongoing business processes function robustly and ensures business capabilities are competitive against threatening challenges. The software architecture should also be what drives the next wave of business changes, whether they are processes, models, or innovative products and features. But conventionally viewing a software architecture at a limited software or product level doesn't work as well as it used to. The practice of viewing software architecture at the business and ecosystem level gains even more emphasis as digitization and innovation make businesses and ecosystems digitally intertwined in how they interact. This article focuses on the role a good software architecture plays in driving innovation and lays out some of the fundamental aspects necessary in innovating with architectural excellence. All right, over on Container Journal, Mirantis has updated its private container image registry to enable it to be deployed on any distribution of Kubernetes. Previously, the Mirantis Secure Registry was only available for Mirantis Kubernetes Engine, a distribution the company curates on behalf of its customers. Version 3.0 of Mirantis Secure Registry was formerly known as Docker Trusted Registry before Mirantis acquired the enterprise assets of Docker Inc. Since then, Mirantis has been working to modernize a container image registry that makes it possible to scan for vulnerabilities in container images and prevent their use if a critical vulnerability is discovered. A private registry improves the security posture of an organization by giving it more control over which container images are used and who within the organization is allowed to create and share those container images. And we have part one of a two-part series on building the ideal Kubernetes distribution for SaaS. Part one covers the problem domain, how running a SaaS product is different from the originally intended use for Kubernetes, and what is not well supported for this use case. Part two will follow up with specific examples and suggestions for how the Kubernetes user community could potentially solve these problems. This article focuses on how InfluxDB Cloud uses Kubernetes, providing the core orchestration layer to create and deliver InfluxDB Cloud across 10 global cloud clusters among AWS, Google Cloud, and Microsoft Azure, all with a single code base. While Kubernetes is a very useful tool for providing a cloud abstraction layer that allows Influx data to run its services on multiple clouds with one code base, the Kubernetes API is not really designed for this use case. Kubernetes can be used as a cloud abstraction layer at scale, but doing so takes a significant upfront effort. This article looks at the challenges Influx Data has encountered and what the company would want in a perfect distribution for their needs. Over on Security Boulevard, we have an article about rats, a trio of rats to be specific, that are being spread in a campaign that taps public cloud infrastructure and is primarily aimed at victims in the US, Italy, and Singapore. RAT is short for Remote Access Trojan, and in this particular campaign, the attack starts with a phishing email that has a malicious zip archive file attached. The file contains an ISO image that includes a malicious loader in either JavaScript, a Windows batch file, or a Visual Basic script. When the initial script is executed on the victim's machine, it connects to a download server to download the next stage, which can be hosted on an Azure cloud-based Windows server or an AWS EC2 instance. The threat actor registers several malicious subdomains through DuckDNS that are used to deliver the malware payload, either NetWire, NanoCore, or Async rats. This article goes into detail this campaign and offers up some insight into why and what organizations can do to protect themselves. And finally, we look at a warning from the Federal Trade Commission and the Securities and Exchange Commission to companies that don't address the risk from the Log4j vulnerabilities. The FTC, for one, warned companies to remediate security vulnerabilities in Log4j, a ubiquitous piece of software used to record activities in a wide range of systems found in consumer-facing products and services. It also raised the possibility of legal action targeting organizations that fail to address the risk from the Log4j vulnerabilities. In a blog post, it noted, the FTC intends to use its full legal authority to pursue companies that failed to take reasonable steps to protect consumer data from exposure as a result of Log4j or similar known vulnerabilities in the future. Failure to identify and patch instances of this software may violate the FTC Act. The SEC noted in its Spotlight box that the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency and its partners are responding to active, widespread exploitation of the critical remote code execution vulnerability in Apache's Log4j software library. The FTC said organizations should consult the CISA guidance, which includes updating the Log4j software package to the most current version found and ensuring remedial steps are taken to ensure that the company's practices do not violate the law. All right, that's it for the headlines. Please check back with me on Thursday when I'll have some more for you. Until then, I hope everybody has a great day, and please, whatever you do, stay safe.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Hey everybody, welcome back to Techstrong TV. I'm Charlene O'Hanlon, and I'm here now with Terry Simpson, who is a Senior Solutions Engineer over at Nintex. Terry, thank you so much for taking a few minutes talking with me today. I appreciate it.
Yeah, and thanks for having me join.
All right, great. So I'm interested in talking to you about the idea of digital workflows. But before we get started with that, I wonder if you could share with us a little bit about Nintex.
Yeah, absolutely. So at Nintex, we focus a lot on process management and process automation. And we have a whole lineup of different capabilities that we offer in order to meet that, whether it's the documentation of the process or, traditional workflows, robotic process automation, document generation, just about any kind of process you want to look to automate. We've got the capabilities to do that.
Excellent. So digital workflows, it's something that we've kind of been talking a little bit about on the periphery for a while now, as more organizations are adopting, new technologies in light of their digital transformation efforts and other things that they do to help advance their business. But it really hasn't been a kind of a major topic of conversation. So let's make it a major topic of conversation. Tell me what you see in the era of digital workflows right now.
Well, I think we've seen over the last 2 years a lot of folks that were not very mature or very far along in their digital transformation journey kind of got thrown into the deep end and were somewhat forced to head down this digital transformation journey, kind of accelerated their adoption of it. So we've seen definitely an uptick in activity, especially over the last 2 years, because it's really forcing organizations to become much more efficient, and out of necessity, they're needing to do a lot of these things more automated. A lot of it's due to just individuals naturally being out of the office and working from home, but out of just pure demand. We've got a lot of use cases where organizations have had such an increase in demand and efficiency needs that they've kind of had to accelerate their adoption of workflow platform like Nintex.
So taking a step back then, maybe there might be some people who aren't really familiar with the term digital workflows or exactly what we mean by that. Can you kind of explain to the audience what we mean when we're talking about a digital workflow?
Yeah, absolutely. So think about processes that you would have in the past done manually, that you could allow a workflow to handle a lot of those processes. So it could be like a task-based process where, let's say I'm going to onboard a new employee and I have to go through 10 or 15 steps in order to get that employee onboarded. Well, with a digital workflow, there are many of those steps that are really ripe for opportunity to actually automate them. So the creation of the user in Active Directory, a person doesn't have to go in and type all that information and create the account. Let the workflow do it. Or assigning a task to a manager to do an interview or a follow-up interview after they're hired. Like a workflow can schedule those type of things. So there's a lot of opportunity to take human tasks and automate them. And even when you get into like robotic process automation, there could be repetitive tasks that individuals are doing every day that you can have a bot do on your behalf. So there's just a tremendous amount of efficiency that you can get out of a process or a workflow and make it much more efficient, and also force individuals to, you almost force them into the process, because when it's automated, it's a natural progression. You know the process is going to be consistent and the same.
And it seems to me that, especially, to your point, the fact that everybody's working from home, having this digital workflow kind of keeps things moving along at a regular pace, rather than having to wait for somebody to get to something so that the next person can then go on and do their thing. It eliminates a lot of those bottlenecks that might occur.
Yeah, it sure does eliminate the bottlenecks, but it also allows you to build somewhat of a queue on certain processes. You can think about a support organization who have support calls that come in. You can kind of manage all that in the queue. The workflow can do all the data entry into the queue. But the thing that I love about it, especially in today's environment, is the workflow can be intelligent enough so that if I, as a user who's been assigned a task, am not getting it done in time, it'll reallocate it to another individual. You could think about, all of a sudden I've gotten sick, because of coronavirus or anything else, flu, whatever it is, and all of a sudden my work queue is getting backed up. The workflow is going to react to that, and it's going to reallocate things automatically based upon time and that type of thing. So it really helps out with customer experience and efficiency there, I think.
So have you seen certain areas of a business where digital workflows have really been embraced during the time of digital transformation and everybody working from home?
Yeah, there's been a lot of different areas. We've seen a big uptick in, I would say, sales order processing. So you can imagine when a sale occurs, the steps that you have to go through in order to get delivery of the item, whether it's software or physical, tangible things as well. It's really accelerated that, because in yesteryear there was much more of a manual process, and there have been a lot of businesses, I think, through the pandemic that have, depending upon their sector, have accelerated their growth in certain verticals, and they've needed workflow process automation in order to keep up, and it's allowed them to increase their capacity without necessarily hiring an army of resources in order to get it done. So there are little examples like that where organizations have just gotten a tremendous amount of value very quickly.
What about the processes that that traditionally have been kind of human oriented? Are those some things that with a digital workflow you can actually kind of broaden the scope, if you will, to include some actions that might not necessarily have a human touch on a regular basis, such as automatically or reordering certain supplies, or going out and finding a source for a particular component or something of that nature? Does that flow into kind of the digital workflow idea as well?
It definitely does. And there are a lot of things that I'll say nice to haves that you're able to incorporate in the process. I'll tell you a really silly one. You think about physically going to a company, and you go in the front door and you get registered as a guest to walk in. And typically in the past, the receptionist maybe takes your picture, prints out a badge, and hands you a little sticky thing, and you kind of get in and go on from there. Well, by automating it, we've even seen other instances where in that onboarding workflow, we're going to have the workflow go ahead and send a text message to your, I'll call it handler, the person that's going to come and meet you. But also, maybe we use some facial recognition, sentiment analysis to say, hey, looks like Terry's in a good mood today. Like, plug that into the text message. Or, hey, looks like Terry might not be in a great mood today. Bring him a cup of coffee to introduce. Like, little silly things like that you can bring into the experience. It's a silly example, but you're able to add these kind of ancillary things around the edges that really make for a good experience. Or maybe it's a little message like, welcome back, Terry. It's great to see you since we last saw you 2 weeks ago, or something like that. That's a nice little touch of data that you have that you might as well bring into the experience. And we see a lot of those kind of examples in play.
No, that's really interesting because you think about automation being so impersonal, but you're advocating bringing personalization to automation. That's a great idea. So where do you think we are kind of on this digital workflow adoption curve? We've talked about since digital transformation in the pandemic, and more organizations are adopting it. But do you think that we're kind of at the beginning of this adoption curve, or do you think we're kind of stuck in the middle, or where do you see us right now?
I think we're still kind of in the beginning towards the middle. There's a tremendous amount of opportunity that's still out there. We had looked at a study from McKinsey a while back that over 68% of processes in an organization are still fairly manual. So if you walk into the average organization today, there's a lot of low-hanging fruit where processes are still manual and it just hasn't been adopted or implemented just yet. So I don't think there's an organization I can't walk into off the street today that you can't sit down and say, hey, here are some opportunities for you to automate certain processes to drive a lot more efficiency. And I think that digital transformation journey it's a long journey, and some organizations have gotten there and they've really embraced it, and they're automating a lot of things. And other organizations have been okay with kind of the status quo, and they're a little slower to adopt it. But I think on average, there's still a lot of opportunity, and we're kind of that beginning to middle stage.
I wonder also if some of the reticence, if you will, or maybe lagging in adoption has to do with the fact that, when we're moving from a manual process to an automated process, somebody's got to go in and set all that up, right? Yep. So somebody's got to take the time away from what they normally do. And depending on the complexity of that could take a little bit of time. So I wonder if it's people just kind of saying, yeah, it sounds great, but I just don't have the time to get it set up. So what do you guys, how do you answer that if that comes up?
Yeah, you're spot on. In a lot of situations, honestly, it's just intimidation, because in a yesteryear world, when you think about automating a process, you think about customization, and you think about developers and code, in that type of environment. And in today's world, it's no code. It's drag and drop. It's a citizen developer, a business user who is building and implementing their own solutions. And a lot of folks in an organization are still intimidated, I think, by technology, and they don't quite understand that it's just configuration, not customization. And once you show them some examples and implement something as silly as the onboarding process when you walk in the front door, and they see how easy that was, then it really starts to gain a lot of momentum and traction. But I think there's still a little bit of education in the marketplace for how easy it is to implement an online form or an automated process. And I think once that perception is gone, or individuals move beyond it, then it really accelerates, the adoption of it for sure.
So what about with, working in a hybrid environment? Because we do have so many offices that we're kind of opening up that are now, again, kind of shutting down because of Omicron. And every day is kind of flux. You don't really know what's going to be happening. So the business doesn't know whether it's open, whether everybody's working from home. It just seems like every day it's a moving target. So how can digital workflows kind of help make sure that organizations do remain up and running and productive, regardless of where their employees might end up working at that particular day or week or month?
Sure. Well, I think the key to your description in the question there is it is absolutely an ever-changing, quickly changing environment. Mm-hmm. And those businesses that are able to react to those changes and put solutions in place, to me, stay way ahead of it. Even if it's like internal challenges, like you talk about in a hybrid environment. So being able to build a form, automate a workflow to meet some of these challenges really accelerates that process. So you can imagine where we were in, let's say, 100% work from home, and all of a sudden I'm transitioning back, I need to fill out a form, and I need to build that form in order to request a place in the office. Like, it's not hard to build that form and get it ready within a couple hours and have it available. Or maybe there's a new requirement or regulation on notification if I've been sick, or how often or how long has it been since I've been tested, or, things like, or sign-offs. Like, so I went back into the office maybe about a month ago for the first time in, a couple years. And when I did that, I had to fill out and sign off and give some notification and, hey, here's what I'm going to sign off on. Being able to do that digitally prior to coming into the office and setting those guidelines in place, all that can be done through a workflow and automation, and even document generation as well, because a lot of those legal sign-offs that I had to do going back in the office, it's a document that has to be generated specific to me, sent to me, and you can fully automate a lot of that. So the business being able to set that stuff up and react very quickly is extremely important.
Wow. Well, I think that we're going to see probably a lot more in the realm of digital workflows as we move forward, if for no other reason than just to kind of keep up with everything that's going on within organizations. Folks have got so many different things on their plates every single day, and having as few manual processes as possible to be able to get through the day and still get their work done and be very productive, I know would be just a win-win and very well received among employees in general. So it's great to see that technology is being our friend in this case. But Terry, thank you so much for having the conversation with me. I really do appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for the invitation.
Okay. All right, everybody, please stick around. We've got lots more Techstrong TV coming up, so stay tuned. Hey everybody, happy Tuesday. This is Charlene O'Hanlon, and I'm here with the webinars preview. Got to tell you about all the webinars that we have coming up on DevOps.com, Container Journal, and Security Boulevard. I can't tell you about all of the webinars coming up. Hope you can check out the websites for that. But I do want to let you know about 3 that are happening very soon in the hopes that you can mark your calendar and join us. The first one is called the Synchronization of Chaos. This one is happening this Thursday, January 20th at 1 p.m. Eastern on DevOps.com. This is sponsored by Gremlin. It's really interesting. As we've moved from monoliths to microservices, we have seen the benefits of decoupling services, such as increased developer velocity and more manageable code. Service independence was also supposed to lead to more reliability, but cascading failures seem more common than ever. So why does this happen, and what can we do about it? So in the field of chaos theory, there's a phenomenon wherein disparate chaotic systems will synchronize over time and when they are connected with each other. So this is known as the synchronization of chaos. So this webinar will dive into the concept of chaos theory, how synchronization of chaos applies to complex technical systems, and some best practices to avoid cascading failures and major incidents. Good stuff there. All right, the second one is called DevSecOps, closing the security gap with developers. This one is happening Friday, January 21st at 11 a.m. Eastern on DevOps.com. This one is sponsored by HackerOne. Organizations that rely on developing secure, functional products understand the value of increased collaboration between security and development teams. Tighter partnership between the two teams can allow organizations to deliver better, safer products faster. But how can this work in the real world? So this webinar will discuss the value of increased collaboration between security and development teams, how tighter partnerships between the two teams can allow organizations to deliver better, safer products faster, GitHub's mission and approach to DevSecOps, such as putting developers first, GitHub's DevSecOps program and the critical role that ethical hackers play, and GitHub's bug bounty program and the importance of building long-lasting relationships with hackers. Another good one. All right, the third one is called DevSecOps Best Practices, Automating Kubernetes Network Security Policy. This one is happening Tuesday, January 25th at 11 a.m. Eastern on Security Boulevard. This is sponsored by Tufin. As Kubernetes use grows, so too does risk resulting from poorly designed Kubernetes network security policies. In this webinar, they'll show us how you can automate the creation of secure Kubernetes network policies and inject those policies into your go-to CI/CD tool, such as Jenkins. This webinar attendees will learn best practices and some pro tips for gaining real-time visibility into your clusters and both north, south, and east-west traffic, designing and deploying secure Kubernetes network policies, and accelerating code promotion and shifting security left by leveraging Kubernetes security policies in your automation pipelines. All right, that's it for the webinar's preview. Please check back with me Thursday when I will have a fresh new batch for you. Until then, I hope everybody has a great day, and please, whatever you do, stay safe. All right, our last presentation of this broadcast is The View with Vizard, in which Mike Vizard speaks with Nick Hudecker, who is Senior Director of Market Strategy over at Cribble. And they talk about observability and how it has become a top-of-mind issue for DevOps. It is a great, great conversation. Let's roll it now.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Hey guys, thanks for the throw. We're here with Nick Hudecker, who's Senior Director of Market Strategy for Cribble. They are a provider of a platform for managing your observability pipelines. Nick, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Mike.
I think every time I turn around now, somebody is talking about observability, and I feel the concept has been around for a while. So what changed in 2021 that put observability on the front burner of everybody's mind?
A few things. I think there's a lot of confusion about what the term means. It's also being applied in a lot of different domains now. Observability was originally kind of an evolution or growth of monitoring, but now it's being applied to like data observability or machine learning observability. So companies, vendors, as well as end users are exploring kind of how else this term can be applied and where it might fit in their existing product set.
I think at least that there's some confusion about what people refer to as monitoring versus observability. A lot of folks are using metrics, and they kind of have this notion of there's a predefined set of things that I'm tracking. Observability seems to be much more about just freely interrogating data collected from just about anywhere to maybe discover the root cause of an issue or find something before it becomes a major problem. Do you think people get the difference?
I don't think so. We at Cribble, we live in the space, so we feel like it's easy to think that we're further along in maturity in the overall market than we actually are. We're not in the fifth inning of observability yet. We're really just still at batting practice and warm-ups. I feel like people are really trying to figure out where observability will fit for them and how it is different from monitoring. I think your synopsis nailed it. Monitoring is very much, here are the things I know I want to monitor, whether it's a given metric, a given level of system performance, or so on. And then observability is much more about how do I find the next thing that I want to monitor? Or if I'm in a security scenario, how does that better help my threat hunting capabilities or how quickly I can respond to a changing security incident? Or if I want to do incident management, let me go back in time and look at all of these different data flows and see how a given incident occurred and how I might be able to go back and prevent that in the future. So it is really more kind of a discovery-based conversation rather than a set of fixed metrics that you want to keep you want to monitor and keep track of.
When you think about observability, do you think people underestimate how challenging it is to collect all that data? One of the things that occurs to me is this data sits in a dozen different tools and any number of platforms, and aggregating all that stuff in a way that makes it queryable is maybe a bigger challenge than people realize.
It's definitely a big challenge. Companies are locked into kind of silos, right? Like a given agent will only talk to a given platform. So that's one challenge, right? How do I even just get access to all of this data from all of these locked in silos? So that's one issue. The other is just cost, right? Like it's easy to say, well, we can instrument applications a lot easier now than we used to. That's true, but there's still a great deal of cost involved in doing that instrumentation, whether it's on the people side. And then also that data has to live somewhere, right? So you've got to store it somewhere. It has to be indexed. It has to be refined. And so just because you can get all of this data now, potentially, how do you better cost optimize for it, right? How do you mix and match between a given set of agents and a given set of destinations that you want to send that stuff to? This is really where we fit in at Cribble. So we we let companies choose the tools that they want to use, as well as manage that data as it's flowing between sources and destinations in the monitoring and observability space.
Does that eliminate the need for me to go hire, say, a dedicated data engineer to go construct those types of pipelines? I mean, how automated is automated?
Well, we're not a machine learning or artificial intelligence tool. So you don't need to go hire a data engineer to build out these kinds of pipelines. This is a tool that Cribble Logstream is designed for operators, whether it's SREs, IT operations folks, security engineers. It's designed for people that are used to dealing with all of this observability data in a way that is comfortable to them. So it's not a mountain of Python code or Spark. It's regular expressions, and it's the tooling and the approaches that they're familiar with.
As we go forward, do you think observability will provide maybe the foundation for what people are calling AI or hoping to do with all this data? I mean, do I have to kind of collect it all and organize it first before we make the next big leap?
The number one problem with machine learning and artificial intelligence in companies is it's not the models. It's not even, I would say, the talent. It's the data, right? Companies are dealing with piles of low quality data. They don't know where it came from. They may not be structured correctly. And so one of the actual use cases that we see pretty regularly for Logstream is shaping data so that it can be used by AI ops platforms. I think a lot of companies bought their AI ops platform and they thought, well, this tool will do the data work for me. They don't. And so one of the use cases we see is, well, let's condition this data on the way in. Let's label it. Let's tag it in the way that's going to make sense for our AI ops platform to use. So I think observability will be a consumer of AI. We certainly see, we see that on our end. And I don't know if it's going to be the one answer that people use.
What's your sense of the observability literacy we have today? A lot of people I talk to don't even know what questions to ask. It's great that we can aggregate all the data, we can put all these tools together, but how do we take it to the next level?
I think that, to your point there in the question of observability literacy, I think there needs to be some kind of common understanding of standards, of data formats, of how things get deployed and how changes might occur in the overall infrastructure setup. But also from the literacy perspective, I think we need to have I think people have to think about, what really drives the business. And so when they're thinking about what new questions do I need to ask and what things should I be concerned about, I think we need a better set of tooling when it comes to how do I explore data. So not just saying, I want to run a query and see what these stats look like. I need basically, I would say, better visualization and data exploration capabilities that allow you to go from our application performance degraded to let me get a holistic view over all of this data so I have a better idea of where to begin that investigation. The tooling that I've seen today is primarily around, I already know what the problem is. I need to go track that down. You may not. And so you might now, I think there's a definite need for better tooling around this data exploration capability.
Do you think in some ways the increased complexity of IT environments is driving this conversation? Because we now have cloud native and Kubernetes, serverless computing frameworks. So are we running out of time to address this issue?
I don't think we're running out of time. I think people are starting to understand the complexity of it, right? You might have a microservices application that is comprised of dozens or hundreds of different services. Many of them could be using their own technology stack of a dozen or more different products, open source frameworks. And then you're deploying that maybe in multiple clouds, maybe on-prem in containers. And so I think what's triggered the observability conversation is exactly that. Things are changing so rapidly. And I might have a DevOps team that's making deployments whenever they want. But then my security operations team is also responsible for all this stuff. And so one side doesn't know what the other side is doing. So everybody's very reactive today. And I think that's been the big driver for observability. Complexity, lack of communication between teams, and so on.
What's your best advice then to somebody who may be the leader of a DevOps team or up the high level in the food chain on that stack of executives about how to go about driving this conversation? Because I think at the staff level, everybody kind of understands the need for it, but they don't have the political capital. So how do I kind of turn this aspiration into something practical?
I think you have to communicate at the business level, right? Now, I think we've seen with the pandemic, a lot of companies are taking a lot of revenue is being driven by digital channels now, right? In-person opportunities weren't available. And so having an observability solution that lets you react faster to changing conditions in the marketplace, understand what's happening in a however you might be deploying your application, all of that impacts revenue. And so I think you have to lead the conversation with, this can impact our bottom line if we don't have a good observability story. The other side of it is security, right? We talk to a lot of companies that they're global, right? Whether they're financial services, manufacturing, et cetera. And they're trying to get to grapple with changing regulatory environments. Every state, I think, in the US is eventually going to have its own data privacy laws. Every country will eventually have their own. And so from a risk management perspective, how do you better grapple with that from all of this observability data, right? I think data governance is better understood for transactional data because there's a business process around it. There often aren't business processes around observability data. And so being able to get a handle on that from a security perspective is also a conversation that a lot of companies should be having.
So we're at the beginning of 2022. Do you think that this is the year of observability, or is it going to be a much more extended journey?
I think we're going to start getting there. Like, if you look at like Google Trends data, and I look every month or so, the question around observability still is, what is it? Right? I think there's still a lot of education. There's a lot of 101 level content that still needs to be put out there. But I think that people are going to start understanding what the value is. How they get there might be a more extended conversation in 2023. But I think the business case will start getting made this year.
All right. I look at that data too, and I also noticed a high correlation between the phrase observability and controllability. And do you think that those two things are going to go in hand? Have you heard people start talking about controllability, or is that just some random search query we happen to be tripping over?
Observability is highly related to control theory from industrial systems. So we could be seeing a little bit of mix and match in that context. It's certainly part of the conversation we have at Cribble because companies are looking for more control over their data. So it's possible that continues to evolve in 2022.
All right. Well, there's a prediction. I think controllability and observability will be the next logical thing because, after all, we're cribbing this from other disciplines anyway, so we might as well keep stealing their terminology, right?
Exactly. Why, what is it? Great artists steal. So let's steal it.
All right. Hey, Nick, thanks for being on the show.
Thanks for having me.
All right. Back to you guys in the studio.
DevOps.com is the #1 online destination for DevOps education and community building. DevOps.com covers all aspects of DevOps, including DevOps best practices and tools, DevOps culture, DevSecOps, business impact, continuous testing, continuous delivery, and more. DevOps.com has the largest collection of original DevOps content, featuring breaking news, blog posts, podcasts, and more. Visit www.devops.com to learn more. DevOps.com, where the world meets DevOps.
All right, that rounds out today's Techstrong TV broadcast. I hope you enjoyed today's as much as I did, as always. Just a quick reminder, we've got Predict coming up this week, folks. Predict 2022 is happening the 19th and the 20th. It is a 2-day virtual summit, 2 half days, and chock full of great presentations, great speakers. The agenda is just amazing. The people who we have and the level of expertise that is joining us for this 2-day event. We've got keynotes, we've got just so many presentations, and each and every one of them really focuses on an area of IT that there are takeaways for everyone in this event. We look at DevOps, we look at cloud native, we look at cybersecurity, we look at open source. We look at it all, folks. So I highly encourage you to check it out. Just go to techstrongevents.com and click on the Predict 2022 banner. You'll be able to see the agenda. You'll be able to see the lineup of speakers. And most importantly, you'll be able to register for the event. And I highly recommend that you do. It's going to be a great one, folks. Again, that is July 19th and 20th this week. All right, that is today's Techstrong TV. I'll be back on Thursday with another brand new episode for you, and we've got some really great conversations lined up on that broadcast also. I'm looking forward to it. Until then, I hope everybody has a great day, and please, whatever you do, stay safe.